Hear that? That's the sound of a patient whose health data is protected from a cyber attack. And that's the sound of a financial system that's digitally secured from bad actors. Right now, there's an invisible war being fought on a digital battlefield that impacts what we do every day. That's why at Peraton, we do the can't be done to help protect the vital systems we rely on. Because if we don't, the alternative is unimaginable. Peraton.
Hey, it's Matt from the Direct-to-Video Connoisseur here. Thanks again for listening to the DTVC podcast. Before we jump in, I wanted to quickly let you know that my new novel, A Girl and a Gun, is available on Amazon now, both on Kindle and paperback. It follows Justin, a successful writer whose past as a scriptwriter for a fetish porn site comes back to haunt him and threatens to derail his career. As he's picking up the pieces, he gets an opportunity to make a movie called A Girl and a Gun with a rom-com star. Justin may have bitten off more than he can chew, though, because she's notoriously difficult to work with. If you're interested, you can find the link on our webpage, along with the link to my first novel, Chad in Accounting. If you have any questions, please reach out, and I thank you for the support. Now, on to the podcast. Welcome back to the Direct-to-Video Connoisseur podcast. As always, it's Matt here, and a very special guest with us tonight. We've got Mitch Lovell from the Video Vacuum back on the show. Welcome back, Mitch.
Thanks, Matt. It's good to be here.
Yeah, it's great having you. And I know this episode we had been planning to do for a while now, and I think what happened last year is I kind of lost track of the podcast completely. I noticed when I was looking at kind of doing forensics on my my posting schedule from last year that right around this time was where I kind of dropped off and kind of faded into the summer. But this episode, this Jim Wynorski, Fred Olen Ray combo episode is one that I've been looking forward to.
Yeah, I mean growing up with cable and, being like an adolescent with cable, their filmography holds a special place in my heart because their films played on cable and, on video store shelves throughout the 80s and kind of like their heyday, when they made the classics in the 80s, the Hollywood Chainsaw Hookers, The Return of Swamp Thing, Not of This Earth. I mean, They really set the tone for like that era, I think, and they have such a vast filmography that you could probably spend hours dissecting them.
Yeah, that's for sure. And with my site, I mean, Fred Olen Ray, I inducted into the Hall of Fame just this past fall. I think Wynorski's one that I wanted to get some more films of his under my belt first before I put him in. But I mean, you look at his filmography, and it is just ridiculous, like how many films he's pumped out.
And what's always cool about both of them is that they can do just about every genre there is, and whatever's kind of hot at the time in the market, they strike while the iron's hot. They'll do like the low budget horror, kind of gravitate to like the low budget action. Then they'll do, the Skinamax movies, erotic thrillers, sci-fi channel movies. Now Fred's doing the Christmas movies for Hallmark channels. So it's very interesting how they can bob and weave with the times. And that's how you have a long career is, by striking out and doing various genres. Because if you stick to one thing, especially in the direct-to-video, television marketplace, it becomes kind of stagnant.
Yeah, and it's interesting because, when you think, you wouldn't think of it, right? Like, you wouldn't think Christmas movies with Fred Olen Ray, but when you really think about it from a Hallmark film standpoint, it's like, okay, we need somebody who can shoot quickly, shoot under budget, and get it done competently. And it's like, well, that's Fred Olen Ray. He knows how to do that for sure.
And another thing with both of them, they both have kind of like their stable of B movie actors and buxom bombshells that they could just call on a moment's notice. You need a guy to play the grizzled police captain. We'll get Ross Hagen in there. You need the guy to play the professor. Robert Quarry's on speed dial. You need the girl to do the shower scene. Julie K. Smith, come on, over. So it's pretty cool seeing like their repertory cast popping up from film to film too.
Yeah, and then you can't go wrong with like a nice Hulk Howell appearance or Brinken Smith or any of those. It's almost kind of a fun thing, almost like you're playing the what is like the mainstay game or something like that. The Fred Olen Ray / Wynorski mainstay game.
Yeah, and then it's funny how they kind of cross pollinate here and there, like or I think they collaborated on Dinosaur Island and Scream Queen Hot Tub Party. So it's kind of cool how they kind of help each other out too. They're not like rivals. They're just kind of in it for film, I guess, for fun and film.
Yeah, it's interesting. One interesting one that came up recently for me was the film Bad Business, aka More Mercy, that originally was an Albert Pyun film that he abandoned for whatever reason. I don't know what the reason was for that. And Wynorski took it over, and they shot it in Hawaii, but it was supposed to take place in Bali or whatever. And there are scenes from that movie that are also used in a Fred Olen Ray film called Final Examination. And so again, it's probably the same idea that they're just sort of sharing stuff. It's like, oh, hey, taking over this Albert Pyun film, because Albert Pyun is listed as a producer on both films, which the only reason why I think he would be a producer in that Fred Olen Ray movie is that the footage that Olen Ray might have been borrowing from Wynorski might have been some of it that Pyun shot.
Yeah, and I think too that kind of goes back to their background and the Roger Corman School of Filmmaking. Why make one movie at a luxury Hawaiian resort when you can make two? And it's kind of like when I forgot which Sci-Fi Channel movie they did, but I think Wynorski did like a Sci-Fi Channel movie in Hawaii and then finished early, and then he called a couple buxom blonde babes, and then they made Busty Cop Go Hawaiian. And it's like, kind of like it goes back to the days where, Roger Corman had Boris Karloff an extra day. They made The Terror just because they had the location and the star, and we'll just throw something together and make a movie.
Yeah, I love the idea of that. The first time I ever heard about even the idea of filmmakers doing that was when I reviewed a Albert Pyun film called Deceit, and there's a credit at the end of Deceit that says, special thank you to Jean-Claude Van Damme, without whom none of this would have been possible. And I remember I posted that when I posted the review, and everybody's like, wow, that's really cool if Van Damme helped him make this movie and all this stuff. And Albert Pyun got into the comments and said, no, that's not really what happened. What happened was I was so annoyed that Van Damme and the Canon people pushed these reshoots on me that I didn't want to do, that I took the camera equipment and filmed Deceit at night when we weren't shooting Cyborg. And so that's what it was he was so mad about the Cyborg reshoots that he used the camera equipment to make this other movie. And, then you start to realize, like you said, like with Corman, Wynorski, Fred Olen Ray, it's like camera equipment's not that cheap when you're renting it, but it's like when you rent it, you're renting it by a certain amount of time, not like by movie. So why not use it to make an extra movie?
Yeah, I mean, and even like the Ed Wood School, you have this stock footage of something, and we, don't worry, we'll make a movie about it later. But you just use available to you, and then you go from there.
Yeah, it makes these movies. I think it gives them a certain charm that that you don't get from sort of like the mainstream sort of, even if it's not just a big picture, a big budget picture, but even sort of some kind of the more mainstream modern direct to video that we see that doesn't really use a lot of these techniques, where it loses a little bit of that charm when they don't use that.
And even, both Wynorski and Ray in the late 90s, early 2000s, they did several like action films where they took borrowed footage or purchase footage from like 20th Century Fox, and they put action sequences from other big budget movies into their littler budget movies. And so what you have is a fairly, pedestrian movie with Treat Williams, but then all of a sudden there's the ending from Long Kiss Goodnight right there. Then they will just cut to him just behind the tractor trailer driving around, and they cut back to the footage from Long Kiss Goodnight. And it's amusing because it, like I said, it goes back to that Corman era of just kind of just like putting it together, and like, guys like us will probably spot the seams, but Joe average moviegoer probably wouldn't even blink twice to, oh, that was a really good movie.
Yeah, because there aren't many people that are watching The Long Kiss Goodnight that are it's like, or even if you are watching The Long Kiss Goodnight, it's like there's usually a good amount of time between that and your Wynorski or Fred Olen Ray movie that you're watching. So you're right. It's like only you have to be like kind of the buffest of the film buff. Is that a way to say it?
Well, it's like you can only see that bus chase from Red Heat so many times in like a late 90s, early 80s action movie, and it's like but it's harder than it looks, because I think there was one of the Wynorski movies took a scene from Maximum Risk, so they have to. The action scene was like, I think in China or something. So they have to find an excuse for them to go through Chinatown. And then when they get out of the car, they have to get out of the car in such a way that it looks like the car from the footage before, but it's totally, if you look for it, it's not. And it's stuff like that, and the fact that, they were making this simultaneously, these kinds of movies together, it's like peanut butter and chocolate. You can't talk about one without the other. So
right, exactly. Yeah, it's good. It's always really fun stuff, and I think what we're going to be doing today and looking at a film from each of these guys, I think it's almost going to show sort of that broad scope of like what they could do, because the first one we're going to be looking at, and I want to make sure I'm doing a great job as a podcast host here, that I couldn't remember exactly which movie it was, but is it Inferno by with Don the Dragon that we're going to do, or The Prophet?
It was Inferno, and also known as Operation Cobra.
Yeah, and then there's also The Prophet, also known as Capital Conspiracy, that also has Fred Olen Ray. And I tend to get those ones mixed up, but I did, I'm good with both of them. So I was like, I thought we said Inferno. I thought we had planned on that one, but my brain starts to sort of second guess myself, and I'm like, well, maybe it could have been The Prophet. I think both of them are available on Tubi. Actually, no, it looks like just Inferno's on Tubi, so that probably helps for people that are out there listening to that this is when they can actually pick up.
Well, see, that's what they're hoping for. They're hoping that they put out Operation Cobra, and then they put out 2 months later Inferno. Have I seen this one? Have I seen Capital Conspiracy? Have I seen Prophecy or The Prophet? Like, that goes back to the Corman school. Re-releasing movies under different titles and suckering them into to renting them again.
Yeah, I mean, you have to assume, like with the Blood Fist movies, where it was just like, okay, we've got Don Wilson, Don the Dragon, that we can make movies with. We're getting these scripts in. Why not just call this movie a Blood Fist movie and put Don the Dragon Wilson in it? When, because I think it's after part 2 or part 3 where they're not even the same character anymore. They just happen to be called Blood Fist, and they've got Don the Dragon Wilson in them.
Yeah, I mean, and that. Again, they were all Corman movies, and I think there was an idea at New Concord where they're like, you know what? I don't think we could hook somebody with just a new Don the Dragon Wilson movie, but if we put Blood Fist 4 as a title, they're like, oh yeah, like I liked 1, 2, and 3. Let me see 4. And I think, was it 6 that has Steve Garvey in it? I mean, I think by that time you're like, do I want to see Don the Dragon Wilson and Steve Garvey in just this like missile silo movie, or do I want to see Blood Fist 6 with Steve Garvey?
Yeah, and then, right, I want to say, because I think that's like one of the few. I think when I did the review of Blood Fist 6, I think I got a screen grab of Steve Garvey, just because I was like, I couldn't believe it was Steve Garvey in that role there. And I can't remember too if that was when he was, because he's like one of those borderline Hall of Famers, right? Where like he would get some votes every year, but he wasn't quite there. And I don't know if maybe that was his way of getting a push to get there. He was trying to get in the, because I think he was a color commentator in LA, but I'm not sure. So maybe that was a part of it too, is to try to get himself in the booth or something.
Yeah, and he turned up in Ice Cream Man too with Clint Howard. I remember. There was, I guess, that brief shining moment where he had, Tinseltown, but on his career path, but sadly it was not to be.
Right, that's a shame, because I know you can do like one of those things that people have been doing on Twitter. Who had a better 4-film run than this, and it's like, yeah, who had a better 4-film run than Steve Garvey? That would be great. Perfect. Yeah, I have to say, I love the one that you had a little while ago that was Wayne Newton, 4 roles from Wayne Newton. That was just absolutely fantastic.
Well, yeah, I mean that, few people can do a Bond movie, an Adam Rifkin movie, Best of the Best too, and star alongside Andrew Dice Clay in a span of like 3 or 4 years. I mean, Newton just killed it. I mean, you want to just say Donkashay, Hollywood, man. I mean, that would be a podcast on itself.
Absolutely. Yeah, I always remember him. Like, my wife likes to watch the old Roseanne episodes on TV Land or whatever they replay. They almost always do that one where Dan and Roseanne go out to Vegas for Tom Arnold and Sandra Bernhard's wedding, and they're watching one of those shows where like the impersonators are doing the concert, and it's like a Wayne Newton impersonator, and then the real Wayne Newton shows up on stage, and of course Roseanne's hammered, and she goes in there and starts making fun of him, not knowing he's the real Wayne Newton. And I always love that episode and his appearance in it.
Well, I mean, he has more chops than a lot of people give him credit for. He's got a really sense of humor. He knows, basically, his place in the pantheon of Vegas entertainers, and I think he really enjoys having fun with his persona. Yeah,
for sure. And like you said, those film appearances he did, they're actually a lot of fun. And I think, we could use more Wayne Newton, I think, in some of our films, especially in direct-to-video movies. If he wanted, I don't know if they're filming in Vegas like they used to. It seemed like in the early '90s, it would be a lot of either LA or Vegas, where they would shoot a lot of DTV stuff. And it seems like they've gotten away from that a little bit. Maybe it's gotten more expensive to shoot there.
Yeah, I don't know. They would always use the same helicopter footage for all the PM movies of all the MGM Grand, and all, you would see that and say, okay, is this Top of the World, or is this Club Wildside, or is it, it was all
right.
the Immortals. It was all, it was all the same footage.
Yeah. It's funny. I was talking with Ty and Brett from Come Up. It's about our favorite scene in Zero Tolerance is when Mick Fleetwood gets killed in a casino. And by Robert Patrick, when he just walks into the casino and kills him.
Yeah, and that's another one you could do a podcast on, Mick Fleetwood. I mean, I don't think you'll ever top Running Man, but
right, exactly. Yeah, it was amazing how a lot of these guys have gotten into some of these movies, and you just whenever you can kind of get those appearances, especially I mean, it's just talking about Steve Garvey here as one. It's like, anytime you get sort of 80s baseball stars, I mean, that's always a fun one.
I mean, I don't think any I don't know, Fred Olin Ray ever worked with any Hall of Famers, but it would be kind of cool, have him and Reggie Jackson, alongside David Carradine and Ross Hagen to clean up the streets of LA wearing his Angels hat.
Right. Yes. I would definitely be up for that for sure. Well, yeah. So we got the 2 movies we're going to look at. We're going to look at Inferno by Fred Olin Ray, and then later we're going to look at Return of Swamp Thing, the Wynorski film, which was definitely a lot of fun as well. But I think it's kind of maybe good to start too with the action, because I think a lot of people come here for the action movies. And this movie Inferno has come up on 2 podcasts already. It came up on when Ty and Brett were on to talk about Don the Dragon Wilson movies, that one made, I don't know if it made my list or their list, but it made one of our 2 lists, and we talked about it there. And then also, we did an episode on Evan Laurie in Malibu recently, and that came up on our Evan Laurie list. So this is one that has come up some before, and but we've never really been able to do kind of a deep dive, but also haven't really looked at it from the Fred Olen Ray angle, which I think it's interesting to see this kind of an action movie with, directed by Fred Olen Ray. Mitch, what did you think of Inferno?
I really enjoyed it. I thought it was one of Don the Dragon's best. It was definitely, maybe if this had been a Blood Fist 13 or something, it would be like in the top 3 Blood Fist movies. I think, and it was surprising to me when first thing on IMDb says it was like the first American production filmed entirely in India. And I was like, whoa, but that kind of makes sense again, because Corman produced it. He was always kind of looking for like this little hook for something. He's like, oh, I'm sure he got some sort of write-off for filming there or something. But like, it was, something that they could put on the box and all the production publicity materials and stuff. It's like the first movie, you wouldn't think it was a Don the Dragon Wilson movie, but I mean, hey, it works.
Yeah. It's like you said, it's really interesting that that they like that would happen, and it's interesting the way they use India in this film. That like some bits of it are definitely India, and then other bits of it are kind of like sort of any kind of Philippine-based action film or Thailand-based action film where you're like, okay, you kind of get all the beats and you kind of know what to expect in it.
Well, and I thought too. I mean, the local, the locales and the local color and the locations gave it a personality that your average Don the Dragon Wilson movie might not have. And I think Fred did a really good job of capturing that within the confines of a DTV 90s actioner.
Yeah, I think that's probably one of the best things about, like, you wouldn't think of it like that. Like, you'd think if you're going to film a movie in a kind of a foreign location that nobody's ever shot in before, that in some ways you think, okay, well, I need somebody big or somebody like kind of a big deal. But actually, no, someone I think like a Fred Olen Ray is perfect for filming in a location that nobody's shot in before, because he's probably one of the more resourceful directors that could handle a lot of the issues that come up and be able to do them in a way that makes the film look really good, like it was.
Yeah, and it's a Fred Olen Ray movie through and through. I mean, halfway through it just stops being a Don the Dragon Wilson movie and becomes a Skinamax movie with Tane McClure and just having just these gratuitous sex scenes right in the middle, and you're saying, oh, well, that was something Fred Olen Ray would do. Yes, it's a Fred Olen Ray movie.
Yeah, that's what's kind of funny about this is that it's kind of funny. I was thinking the same thing when I did when I was looking at that Bad Business movie that was originally started as an Albert Pyun film, and then Wynorski took over, and it's like, okay, you've got like a strong female lead who's a woman of color, that's Albert Pyun, but then it's like you've got Julie K. Smith and another woman in a lesbian sex scene. There's the Wynorski part, and it's almost kind of like with Fred Olen Ray, kind of the same thing. You almost makes you wonder when he does these Christmas movies if he's sort of jumping out of his skin wanting to do a love scene or something like that, or maybe there's an unedited version of these Christmas movies that has like a steamy love scene in them.
Well, yeah, then I might actually start watching them then, if that was the case. Julie K. Smith and the 12 Lays of Christmas or something. I'd watch that.
Yes. Yeah, one thing about, like, I know with the Christmas movie that I watched with my wife, I think it was like Christmas in Palm Springs or something like that. It had Lawrence Hilton Jacobs in it, and then Michelle Trachtenberg was the female lead. I noticed that Fred Olen Ray would do these little touches of like kind of old, movies from like the 50s and 60s that I imagine he grew up watching. And there's sort of touches with certain characters. And I felt like that was something that I got here too, that like the way he uses India is kind of the way that you would see like a, I don't know, thinking like a Gunga Din or some kind of like an older film that, maybe like, Bogies in India, right? And it's really not India. It's probably like a lot in LA, but with the cobra, the snakes, and some of those little touches that gave it that feel of an older movie that I really liked as well.
Yeah, and I think there was a lot of kind of James Bond DNA in there. Of course, there was like the octopusy, like the Indian marketplace fights, but the fact that the crime lord had this rebellious daughter that kind of falls in love with the hero. It's kind of like on Her Majesty's Secret Service. The fact that the two crime lords are playing Bond against each other is kind of like, or Don the Dragon Wilson was kind of like James Bond in For Your Eyes Only. And then there was like that fake assassination attempt scene that was like right out of the Living Daylights. So it was fun picking up these little kind of Bondian kind of elements in it too.
Yeah, it's kind of funny you mentioned about the Living Daylights with the fake assassination, because it's almost like when that happens. So to give people an idea, of how the story works is that Don the Dragon Wilson's an Interpol agent. It was Interpol, right? I think it wasn't the DEA or something like that.
And Fred Olen Ray is his boss.
That's right. Fred Olen Ray has an appearance. And actually, it's kind of one of the first times if you look at a Fred Olen Ray movie where, because he's in a lot of his movies, but this is one where he's actually near the top of the cast, which he's usually not that close to the top. You usually have to click full credits to see his name come up.
Well, I think they might have been doing that because it was order of appearance, and he kind of shows up like 5 minutes in. So
that's right. Yeah, he's kind of one of the earlier ones. And then Rick Hill is the partner, and we think Rick Hill is dead. We think he's been killed. And I have to say, there was a part of me that maybe it was like that, that Bond tradition in my head that I thought, well, no, I think we're going to see him again later. That almost like that it's embedded in my mindset of like some of these Bond tropes that we pick up in these movies.
Well, yeah, I mean, it was definitely GoldenEye. Yeah. I mean, with 006 faking his death and then later being revealed as the villain. I mean, there's another Bond trope for you.
Yeah, well, that's a good point, that GoldenEye, because that would have been even more recent. I remember in college we watched that movie so much because we had people that played the N64, or we call it the N69 because we thought we were really funny back then. But they played the James Bond game on the N64 in the dorm. So that may be even more so that, right, I've seen that one so many times that it just like, because it was almost like there's no, and of course everybody that's listening, I've just completely spoiled that part if you didn't go into it expecting that Rick Hill was going to come back at the end. But yeah, you get that feeling. I mean, part of it is Rick Hill, which, Rick Hill does play the hero a lot of times, but it seems like with Fred Olen Ray movies that he's more likely to kind of, not be the kind of the straight ahead hero. I mean, obviously with Fred Olen Ray, he's not really doing those same kind of like sword and sandal films that he did in the early 80s, like Deathstalker. So it's a little bit more realistic that you'd see Rick Hill show back up in the end as a baddie.
Well, I think it's just like a natural progression of a career. First you start off as kind of like the beefcake guy, and then when you're a little bit further along into your career, you're not as young, you're still in good shape, so you make a formidable villain because of you're still kind of beefy and stuff, but a little bit older, a little bit more rugged, and he works as, I thought he worked really well as the villain, and actually Evan Laurie does a really good job as the villain, because there's a stretch there you think he's going to be the main villain,
right?
And I'm like, he's like the usual the lovable lunkhead kind of guy. I'm like, but he really pulled it off. And then when it makes more sense when Rick Hill's revealed to be alive, you're, oh yeah, he would be the perfect kind of like odd job type henchman for Rick Hill.
Yeah, I loved Evan Laurie in this. It was one of my favorite roles of his. I think the only one I think that I liked better than this one was when he played Slash Gallagher in Hologram Man, a PM Entertainment classic. But he actually wrote that one, whereas this one he was just coming in. But yeah, he is fantastic, and you're right. Like, you don't really believe that he's the one who's like controlling all of these Indian scientists and coming up with like what is the deal? It's a computer program that can unencrypt every computer program. I was trying to figure out some kind of computer thing that allows you to have access to every other computer program or something.
It was a disk that something, I guess he could unlock like a online bank accounts or something, and he could make off with the money. They never explained quite how he does it, because they were talking about kind of, crippling the bank market or something. And then later you see him like packing up suitcases of money. He's like, how did he get the money? Wouldn't it just be wired into an account? But you just kind of shrug it off here. Okay, whatever.
Right. Yeah, there's always this sense, I think, with a lot of these movies where it has to. There's a sense, maybe because it was like the late '90s or something, that we weren't as computer savvy as we are now. So they felt like they needed tangible representations of everything to make us understand what was happening. That's why there was always a disc, even though it was easier to just have a whole bunch of copies of a disc. When I was in school, I remember making copies of things. It was pretty easy to do, but now it's always like there's one disc, and that's you got to have that one disc that moves around. I think it's the same thing with the cache, where it was like, I guess seeing the number move on one computer screen to another, it wouldn't work. But whereas like they like the idea of having like big stacks of cache there.
Well, yeah, it's one of it's the MacGuffin. It really doesn't matter what they're after, and what matters is Don kicks a bunch of people in the face, and he does that, and it's almost structured kind of like a Fred Olen Ray Skinamax movie, because his Skinamax movies, you need a sex scene every 7 to 8 minutes to justify its existence, and in here, Don the Dragon Wilson gets into a fight every 7 or 8 minutes, and it's not really, there's no really reason for him to fight. Like, he'll show up at a bar and like some guy like talking too loudly, and he's like, shut up, and he's like, no, make me, and then they have this bar fight, and it's like, but it's just filling that qualification where Don's got to be kicking somebody every 6 minutes, or we just can't release this.
Yeah, it is kind of amazing, because I always think a good action movie follows that format, almost like a musical, right? Where like a musical is always going to have a musical number every 10 to 15 minutes. And when you were talking about it, it's like, yeah, that makes a lot of sense that like Fred Olen Ray, right? Because if Fred Olen Ray puts out a Skinamax movie that just has a lot of talking and not a lot of love scenes, it's not going to work, right? Nobody wants to watch that. And so for him to take that mindset from the Skinamax movie and put it into an action movie, it's it's like PM Entertainment doing an action scene, flipping a car every 10 minutes or something like that. It's going to give the audience what they want, and I think there's almost a crass sensibility with it, like oh, you're just jamming stuff in to give the audience what they want, but really it's more like saying like, no, I know, it's like a restaurant owner who's like, yeah, I know my audience, or my customers want hamburgers, so I'm going to make them hamburgers, and I'm going to, make just plain old good old hamburgers that they're going to like, instead of being like, no, I'm going to make these small plates, and I'm going to make these like, obnoxious charcuterie plates and things like that. And it's like, no, you want a restaurant that just makes what you want to make. And I think that's kind of what Fred Olen Ray does, where he's like, I'm going to make the movie that you want to see.
And I think you really hit the nail on the head, because he makes movies for a specific market. If you look at both him and Jim Wynorski, they do movies for the marketplace. If they're going to make an action movie, they put action in it. They're going to make a TNA movie, they put TNA in it. They're going to do a Sci-Fi Channel movie, there's going to be a CGI raptor eating somebody every so often. And I think they know they like the best of the exploitation filmmakers, they exploit the genre and not really the people that they're people aren't being exploited, the genre is being exploited, because that's the hot thing right now. We got to crank out 6 of these before the next big kind of trend comes up.
Yeah, and I think that you're right about, like, with Fred Olen Ray, the fact that he does action in this film so competently, and he makes such a great action film. But you're right, it's kind of testament to what he was doing, because the Skinamax movie was really big in the early 90s, and it's still big as you get into the late 90s into the 2000s, but there is a bit of a shift there where they want things that can get on the video store shelves that don't have to be behind a curtain at the video store. And so a director who can do multiple things like that can get work all the time, because of course, now the fact that he's doing Christmas movies is testament to that he can really just do anything that they need him to do.
Yeah, and one thing too, the cool thing with Fred is his style is it's almost an invisible style. Like, from film to film, it's like a chameleon. if he's making a Don the Dragon Wilson movie, it looks like a Don the Dragon Wilson movie. If he's making a Skinamax movie, it looks like a Skinamax movie. Whereas Jim Wynorski kind of has a overall like all his movies look like they could probably take place in the same universe. They're always brightly lit. There's always kind of this tongue-in-cheek atmosphere to everything he does, even the kind of like more serious movies. And like there's a feeling almost like a John Landis movie where almost anything can happen. It's brightly lit. It all kind of has that same kind of color palette.
Yeah, that's a really great point too, because with Fredo and Ray, one movie that he did recently was a film called Sniper Special Ops. I don't know if you saw that one with Steven Seagal,
where he sits for like half the running time, and yep.
Yeah, and so he essentially just uses Tim Abel to be like kind of do the heavy lifting for the film. But you're right. He makes that a Seagal movie, despite the fact that Seagal is sitting the entire time, and it's technically a Tim Abel movie. But it has the beats and the feel of kind of the modern Seagal film. It's almost like he talked to Keone Waxman or somebody like that and said, or just watched some Keone Waxman Seagal movies and said, okay, here's how I need to do this, and he pulls it off. And yeah, you see the same thing here with the Don the Dragon Wilson movie, where he makes a Don the Dragon Wilson movie.
Yeah, and I mean, it's impressive because they're working, on time and budget that most directors would just walk away from, but because of that Corman training, he can really get in and just kind of crank them out. I mean, both him and Wynorski were making movies at such a rate in the late 90s that they had to take pseudonyms because nobody would believe that this, two guys can make all these movies. So I think he was Ed Raymond, and Wynorski was Jay Andrews. So it's just kind of a testament to just their thriftiness and their dedication to their craft, and just keep grinding them out. And it's always interesting if you look at their IMDb pages, like there will be 4 or 5 movies in a row of a certain type or genre, and then they'll just make a shift from kind of like erotic thrillers to kids movies, and then it'll shift again to horror, and then it'll shift again to action movies, and it's just it's you can chart what was hot in video stores at that exact moment by the films that they were making.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting if you go back to 1997 when Inferno comes out, right? Also in 1997, you have Illicit Dreams 2, which he did as Roger Collins. And then he has The Shooter that he does as Ed Raymond. Rapid Assault that he does as Sherman Scott, Mystery on Makeout Mountain, which he's also doing as Roger Collins, and then The Masseuse 2, which he does as Peter Daniels, and then he has a movie called Hybrid. So Hybrid and Inferno are the 2 movies he did under his own name, and then he did, 5 other movies under different names in that same year, 1997.
Yeah, I mean, when you kind of do the math, you're like, well, they were probably working, I don't say 10 days, maybe. They might have shot the whole thing in 2 weeks, edited in 2 weeks, released it 2 weeks later. So I really, it's just kind of like, and like when you're working in those kind of conditions, like you said, when it comes time to make a Christmas movie for the television market, you're already kind of working on a television schedule. So it's just the natural kind of work environment, I think.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right that it's like he kind of just knows. Yeah, it's interesting. I was trying to see if we could get some idea of how long it took to make Inferno, because I feel like if Inferno was shot in India, that had to have been the longest one. But because they would have had to fly out there. Because I know I think some of the other movies that he did that same year, or that at least came out that same year. So I guess it's possible too that like he did Inferno in '96. And then the other ones maybe early in '96 just kind of banged out a bunch of them, and then did this one, or who knows how they come out. But I was looking to see if maybe this one was, because sometimes they'll tell you how long they were shot for, but it doesn't say how long it took to make this one.
Yeah, I mean, I can't imagine Corman spent a whole lot on it, But like again, the location work is really good, and it feels like it could have been a theatrically released film because I mean, it has a look and a feel to it that it looks and feels like a Don the Dragon Wilson movie, but because of the atmosphere, it definitely has a bigger feel than a Blood Fist movie.
Yeah, yeah, you're absolutely right there, and it is interesting that they didn't package it as a Blood Fist, but I guess maybe because the fact that it was the individual movie. I guess looking at Don the Dragon Wilson's, oh, you know what, he did the last Blood Fist was Blood Fist 8 in 1996, so they must have decided that they'd gotten too much blood from that stone, and they had to start calling movies different. Like Corman, I guess, decided like Blood Fist 9 was too much, I guess.
Too much blood from that fist.
Right, exactly. Yeah, and it's funny because I think from our standpoint, I mean, I don't know. I mean, sometimes I have to, trying to take myself back to the late '90s and going to the video store. I mean, or thinking about like going through the TV guide or looking at the guide box or something like that. Like, would I have said like, man, Blood Fist 9, that's too many. Are they going to stop making these at some point? Or would I have been like, yeah, sure, Blood Fist 9. Let's give it a look and see what it is.
Yeah, it's funny because I remember in the '90s, like going to the video store, like I was still renting kind of theatrically released movies that I just didn't get to see in the theater, and on occasion would rent like a DTV action movie, and it's only kind of like once DVD kind of took over, and you'd start to see these videos for 50 cents, dollar at flea markets and thrift stores. I started taking a chance, and I was like, oh, yeah, these movies that I kind of passed over and just kind of were like, yeah, they look kind of cheap. Well, they are kind of cheap, but they're actually kind of fun, especially when you get kind of start getting into like the filmographies, like really kind of deep dives, like Evan Laurie and other just over the top three, Arnold, Bruce, Sly. And then you start getting down to like the bottom of the food chain. There's still a lot of fun to be had in those films, and I don't, like you said, would we have enjoyed them when they came out? Maybe, but they're a lot of fun 10, 20 years later.
Yeah, it's almost like they're more fun in that sense, right? Because you get that sort of that nostalgia for things in the film, like the fashions that are very '90s, or the the fashions, the haircuts, all of those kinds of things. That even like seeing products from that time period, I think without that, like it almost makes the movies more fun than they would have been back then.
Yeah, like when you see the anytime there's like a stripper in a '90s movie and she has like the black cord choker necklace, it's like, oh yeah, that everybody had that. Or she'll take off her change from her stripper outfit and then put on her flannel and her Doc Martin boots, and you're like, yep, this is a '96 movie. I can tell you just from the outfit.
Right, exactly. Like those, like the flannel shirt, like with like the really light jeans with the holes in the knees and nowhere else in the jeans. It's like that I could even see the outfit that you're describing there. Almost that looks like a Bobby Brown in a at a heavy metal video in the early '90s kind of look.
Yeah, and like it's one of those things where I think too, Don the Dragon Wilson, he did so many movies too. And like I think if you ventured out and tried, if you saw the wrong first the wrong movie or first or second Don the Dragon Wilson movie, you might not have, went back for more. But, like if you saw Inferno, you would probably been a fan and like went back to those, because he had a lot of misses, but when he hit like, Out for Blood, the first Blood Fist, I mean, he proved Ring of Fire, which was really good with Maria Ford, that he working with the right people behind the scenes with a good script and a good director. I think he's that much better. I think when he's kind of given kind of a boilerplate script and just like a guy behind the camera that just wants to knock it out, he kind of suffers a little bit. But like with the right production team behind him, which is the case with Inferno, he proves that he really could have been upper echelon stuff if he had the right team behind him.
Yeah, and I think also too with this film, you've got I think the fight coordinator was Art Camacho. I'm pretty sure it was Art Camacho was the fight choreographer. And so, I mean, I think a lot of Wilson's best stuff came with Art Camacho as the fight choreographer, whether it was the Corman films or the PM Entertainment films. And I get a sense again that someone like a Fred Olen Ray would kind of just let an Art Camacho just do what he needs to do, and maybe even give the cinematographer some ideas of how you'd want to shoot it or something like that, and just sort of let that piece of it happen. And of course, on time and on budget. He's probably going to be like, okay, you've got enough shots of it. We're good there at a certain point. But by the same token, I think he might let them do it to get those scenes to look right, as opposed to being like, no, we need to, he wouldn't butt in, I guess, as much. And that's probably another way that he can be so successful at doing different types of films.
Well, absolutely, because he worked with Gary Graver, who had been, he's worked everybody from Orson Welles to porno movies as a cinematographer and director. And a guy like that can, shoot. And when you have like an Art Camacho, I think Fred Olen Ray is smart enough to like just get out of the way and trust them to do their thing. And especially when you're shooting, to a budget and to a time schedule, I think it shows his good instincts to just kind of surround himself with a pretty capable, fast working crew.
Yeah, you're absolutely correct. Like Graver, in addition to Art Camacho, and I know there's some other people in that crew, that you get something that's so really really competently done that like when you're watching it, you don't feel like it's something that would have been shot in a Corman time, sort of a Corman timeline with a Corman budget. It feels like something more than that.
Yeah, absolutely, and I think that's the secret that makes Inferno better than probably Blood Fist 4 through 8. I still have a soft spot for Blood Fist 3 because I think it's like basically the Shawshank Redemption of punch fighting movies.
Yes, exactly. Does that one have George Takei in it? Or no, wait, George Takei. I'm thinking. No, all right. I'm getting my movies mixed up here. Blood Fist 3 has Richard Roundtree in it, I believe, right? Yes.
Yeah.
George Takei was in a prison movie called Live by the Fist with there was a Jerry Trimble movie that was also, I believe, was also a Corman film. So that's where I'm getting my Corman prison movies mixed up.
Yeah, too bad they couldn't get Shatner in there, and they could have had a whole Starfleet reunion.
Yes, yeah. It's always funny to see some of them in some of those movies. I always love. There was one that had James Doohan in it. I remember, and I was just like, this is the best. Just seeing Scotty in this movie. Yeah, and I mean, I get like how it works, right? That if you see one of those names on the cover, you're like, oh, interesting. DeForest Kelly. What has he been doing since Star Trek? I got to check this out. Or whatever the name is. Michael Dorn is one that I always, whenever I see his name on something, even though, I mean, he was on Chips before he was Worf. And I remember him being like a sort of a supporting cast member on Chips, but it's still Worf for me that I always, whenever I see Michael Dorn, I associate him with that character.
Yeah, and I mean, how many movies have we seen where it says David Carradine on the box art, right? And David Carradine sits behind a desk 5 minutes in the beginning and 5 minutes in the middle and 5 minutes at the end. He finally gets up to put the handcuffs on the guy. Right. So it's always interesting to see, like, these guys that come in and just kind of knock out 2 or 3 scenes, but they're kind of prominently featured. But like you said, that a name like that would draw you in, only to find that, they weren't really given a whole lot to do.
Right. Yeah. There was one on Time Brett's Come Up With Reviews podcast where we were talking about Fred Williamson's movies, and they talked about Down and Dirty, which has David Carradine, his entire time in the film is just him sitting in the back of a limo talking to people. So he didn't move anywhere else, didn't go anywhere else. He just sat in the back seat of that limo and did his scenes from there.
And I think too, I mean, guys like that, especially when they get a little bit older, I think they kind of, have an understanding with whoever's the casting director or the, production crew. It's like, Dave's only going to sit down on this one. And, and when you get, up there, you can't do like you did when you were Kane in Kung Fu.
Right.
And there, I think the expectation is too, like, to let these younger guys kind of do their thing, and you can come in, cash your paycheck, but still kind of, yeah. I don't think a guy like Carradine would phone it in, but he would. He's presence enough. I mean, he's one of those guys you could just watch, and even if he's just sitting behind a desk drinking whiskey and taking the guy's gun and badge, and being like the asshole captain role, you still want that, and it's still a feather in the movie's cap.
Yeah, that's for sure. Yeah, and it's interesting because I think that's the that's the area that Bruce Willis is transitioning into at this sort of twilight of his career, and I think it's kind of an interesting thing for us to reckon with, right? Because we grew up with the Bruce Willis who was the big star. He was the name on the marquee. He was, and he not only was he McClane in Die Hard, but he sort of changed the action genre where it was like, oh, you can have a guy like Bruce Willis as your action lead, and now he's doing that kind of thing. Now he's doing the sit down roles where he wears the same suit the entire time, and you don't know how many scenes he's going to be in, but his name's going to be on the cover. And I think it's kind of interesting for people that like us that grew up with him as the big star, having to sort of see him in that Carradine role now.
Yeah, I have a theory about that, and I think it's one of those Saw things where Jigsaw has told him he's got to star in 9 DTV movies in 12 months, or something bad will happen, or he'll lose a foot or something, and he's just forced to do this, and jump through these hoops. Or maybe it's maybe going back to Die Hard with a Vengeance. Maybe it's Simon Says. He's like, Simon Says you have to star in 10 shitty DTV movies. Yeah, I don't know. It's just it's one of those things where there's something going on there that nobody knows about, that because there was a time when he would actually give a shit in some of those movies and actually show a spark in his eye. Now, I mean, it's like almost like Tor Johnson walking through the movie now.
Yeah, well, what was it? Sean Malloy, who does I Must Break This podcast, was saying how he watched one of the trailers. I think it was Gasoline Alley, and he was watching the trailer where it seemed like Willis was having trouble opening his eyes, and he's like, "Is this like an Ed Wood Bela Lugosi kind of thing, where they're just kind of propping him up for these films?"
Yeah, and that's one of those things too that we watch it now as kind of like this like odd fascination, like God, it's like you want you want to look away but you can't. But maybe down the road, like these DTV movies, like maybe in 10-15 years we're going to be watching them the way that we watch like the patty cake slapathon era of Steven Seagal. And you know what I mean? Because I think when we watched those movies when they first came out in the 2000s, we were just depressed. We were like, is this really a Steve? He's not even using his own voice. Right. And I think we were all just kind of just let down. But now we watch it knowing, his personal life and, his affiliations. It just makes those movies even, it gives them a charm that maybe wasn't there when they were first released.
Yeah, I totally agree with you there, because I've noticed, like, even for myself, because I'm kind of finishing up those, Seagal direct-to-video movies, and I'm starting to kind of do the reviews of them, and I'm noticing that my own reviews of them are a little bit softer than they were, when I started the blog in the late 2000s, where I was just like, man, this is horrible, it's like, I think Time Bread always refer to them as the fake shemps. Like, they're sort of like those stunt doubles that because Seagal won't do his ADR, he doesn't do his reverse shots, and I think Willis is kind of the same way. No ADR or reverse shots, and it's like you're watching these and you're like, yeah, whose voice is that? That's supposed to be Seagal, or you're like, who is this person that just got hit? And there's almost like you said, there's almost a charm to it now where you're watching it and you're kind of just having fun with like, okay, here's the young guy who's going to do the heavy lifting in this movie while Seagal sits and says stuff with a Cajun accent.
Yeah, I mean, and it's weird because I mean they are definitely using that Seagal formula for Bruce here, and it's an ill fit. And like you said, it's just kind of, one hand it's depressing, but on the other hand, there's a bizarre fascination to it, I think.
Yeah, no, I agree. It's one of those things where I was like, you know what, I'm not going to review any more of these Willis movies because they feel like bait and switches, and it's like, all that stuff. But then when I say that, I start seeing them pop up on Tubi and places like that, and I'm like kind of fascinated to know. Like, I'll watch the trailer and be like, wow, this looks like Willis has a really good, like a really important character in the film. How are they going to mitigate the fact that Willis is usually only in these for like 10 or 15 minutes? And then I start watching it and realize, like, oh yeah, I've watched 45 minutes and he's only been in it for 5 minutes worth of shooting. And it's like, okay, I see how it works. But when it's almost like watching the trailer, like, how are they going to make that work? That it's only going to be 5 minutes of Willis in 30 minutes of the first 30 minutes of the film or whatever.
And then now they're just recycling the same picture of him on all the posters and it's just, I mean, and that just puts you off even more. It's like, they just kind of like flip the image. It's like, okay, and it's like, oh, we're a long way from Butch Coolidge.
Right. Yes. Well, yeah, because it's like there's the one in the Gasoline Alley. It's the same suit that he always wears, and they just stuck a badge on the suit to make it. It's like, okay, what is this?
Yeah,
So.
It's sad to see, but we kind of, as fans of these movies, we kind of want to see that. Even though we don't want to see the movie, we're
Right.
like, okay, like, well, I'll get to it. Like you said, when it's on Tubi, I'm not going to pay VOD for it, but when it comes to Tubi, I might.
Yeah, and it's. I mean, when you go on Tubi, Bruce Willis, I mean, he has like 10 at a time on there, and so and they all, like you said, they all have kind of the same suit, the same cover. It's just who's the young actor that's doing the heavy lifting that's different between the films.
I think it's always Chad Michael Murray, the ones that I've seen.
Yeah, he does them. I mean, there was one that I did a podcast episode of that had Mark Paul Gosselaar, which he was kind of not as young as you'd think young for doing the heavy lifting. He was kind of on the older side of the young guy doing the heavy lifting. I think there's one that has Patrick Muldoon, which again a little bit older on the for the young guy doing the heavy lifting on that. So you're right. Usually it's like you said. I think Kellen Lutz was in one. Usually they are a little bit younger than that.
Yeah, and like I said, it's one of those things where I think Jigsaw has them in a warehouse, and they have these cameras set up, and he does scenes from all these movies in like a 24-hour like period, and then he goes back to this little cell, and then once they've edited everything into 10 other movies, then they bring him back out and they do more.
Right, instead of Jigsaw, it's that producer Randall Emmett who produces all those movies, and he's funny, right? He's got some information on Bruce Willis that, yeah, if there's like some kind of blackmail out there, I can't imagine it's worse than doing all these movies. But maybe he just likes whatever he gets paid for them, like $60,000 or something. Like maybe he's just like, hey, give me the $60,000. I mean, I can't imagine he's paying alimony to Demi Moore. I don't know what he's got, bills that he needs to pay or whatever, but.
Well, I mean, or it could be a thing where they paid him a flat rate for however many months, right, and whatever script lands on the table at that moment, he's got to do. I don't know.
That could be it too. Yeah, I mean, I wonder, because he does occasionally still get like big budget films to do, and maybe that's part of it too. Is that like where he's at in his career, he can't get paid a lot for big budget films, and it's like, okay, I want to do the big budget films, but I'm not going to get paid much for those. So I'm going to do these other movies to kind of maintain the lifestyle that I was used to when I was the big star. But yeah, it's, and I'm wondering too, when we hit that point of like, diminishing returns with it. Cause I know with Seagal, he did hit that moment where he was pumping only like 3 a year out. But even then they were like, okay, 3 a year, he started to, he wasn't making as much money off those 3 a year as he was when he was doing like 1 a year. I mean, Bruce Willis is up to 9 now. So I don't know if there's a point where people are just like, I can't keep up with all these Bruce Willis movies.
Well, hopefully that, it'll intersect at some point. Maybe Bruce will start appearing in some Fred Olen Ray or Jim Wynorski movies, because I think he might be at that point now.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing too. You wonder is like, for some of these producers like Randall Emmett, who just likes to pump these movies out, you wonder if a Wynorski or a Fred Olen Ray are the kind of guys that they would want to start working with. Or, I don't know, because it feels like those two. I don't, I think David Dakota is another name you think of that can they can pump these things out so quickly and efficiently that from a DTV, stream standpoint, I mean, I don't know what you get for streaming a movie on Tubi in terms of commercial revenue or whatever, but I would think with the way that these guys can keep costs down, that they're the kind of guys that you'd want pumping them out.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of interesting because, like I said, they go to where kind of the market is, and I know for a while Jim was doing a lot of kids movies, like the Doggone movies, and there's a market, on Tubi. A lot of his movies pop up on Tubi, and like you said, if they can keep costs down and whatever the ad revenue is, I'm sure it turns a profit pretty quickly, because a lot of a kid-friendly movie like Doggone Christmas or Doggone Hollywood,
Yeah.
it's definitely kind of like the movie like the grandparents would put on for the kids when they're over, or it's kind of like one of those but it's kind of interesting too, because I haven't watched those movies personally, so I'm only just kind of guessing, but based on what he did in Return of Swamp Thing with the kid cast,
Yes.
I think they're hilarious in it. They're the kids that kind of come in and out of the swamp trying to get pictures of Swamp Thing. Their stuff is some of the funny stuff in the movie. So I mean, even earlier in his career, he was proving that he could do kind of like family friendly entertainment, even though he was the guy primarily at that point known as the guy who did Chopping Mall.
Right. Yeah, maybe this is a good segue. We'll kind of move into that second movie, or our second movie, and looking at Wynorski with Return of Swamp Thing, because I was kind of shocked by from my own sense that when thinking of like the DC Comics movies, or just thinking of my favorite comic book movies, that one, I hadn't considered the first Swamp Thing as one of my favorite comic book movies, but then two, Return of the Swamp Thing. I think it's because those movies came out, well, it was in 1983 for the first one, and then 1989 for Wynorski's. I think I just hadn't really seen them since then, and so they kind of put them out of my brain. And then all of these comic book movies have come out since. But I think thinking about it, like it maybe just in terms of the DC movies, and maybe you don't put it with the Marvel ones, but I loved Return of Swamp Thing. It's definitely up there again as one of my favorite comic book movies.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things you got to consider at the time, because it was the year of Batman.
Yeah.
And I think in the 80s, if you weren't Superman and you weren't Batman, if you were this kind of like in between mid-level comic book property, you either went to television or you went to direct to video. And I mean, the same year The Punisher with Dolph came out. And a great movie, but didn't really have that rabid comic book fan base that even as big a name as Captain America, it's directed by Albert Pine and it's going right to video. So I mean, what you have is it's interesting. It's kind of it's worlds apart as the marketplace then and the marketplace today.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that it's actually interesting is you mentioned you mentioned Superman and Batman, because at the beginning of Return of Swamp Thing, they use a lot of panels from old Swamp Thing comic books, and there's one where I guess Swamp Thing was at Arkham Asylum or something, where there's a shot where it's got the Joker in it. I couldn't tell if the other one was a Batman villain as well, but definitely the Joker was there. And I know maybe in 1989, maybe they weren't quite as protective. Maybe it was after the Tim Burton films take off and Batman becomes such a huge property that DC became so protective over Batman that you couldn't just use Batman in anything that you were doing.
Yeah, well, and I think whatever I'm not sure the production company that was behind Return of Swamp Thing, but I think that might have been part of an existing deal with the first Swamp Thing. So like they might have had so much time to like kind of use their options, make a sequel.
Yeah.
So so that would have still been like around 82, 83. So at that time, I think, and even today, comic book movies are looked down on.
Yeah.
And you have the rabid fanboys now, but the critics, I mean, the whole Martin Scorsese kind of kerfuffle where, talking down on Marvel movies and everything. But something tells me that Martin Scorsese would really appreciate the Return of Swamp Thing, because it is one of those movies where it's fun. I mean, and a lot of the comic book movies, and Batman kind of ushered this era in, gloomy, dark, brooding. But Return of Swamp Thing, I mean, again, it's like all the Jim Wynorski movies have kind of the sunny, whether he's working in a Skinamax movie or a Sci-Fi Channel movie, they look like it could take place in the same universe as Swamp Thing, because it's brightly lit. It's the compositions are. I mean, he does a hell of a job giving. I don't know how many hero shots Swamp Thing has of like stepping in the frame. The camera's slightly lowered, and he looks larger than life. And he does a great job of just presenting the hero, in ways that Zack Snyder probably has never thought of.
Yeah, I mean, that was one of the things that really stood out for me with the Winor, because I hadn't seen either Swamp Thing or the Return of Swamp Thing in a long time, so I watched them both because they're both on Tubi, which is great for anybody. And I think even the TV show was on Tubi as well. From I think what was that, the early '90s, there was the TV show. But what's great, the difference between the two Swamp Things is that you get the first Swamp Thing. It's it's like the origin story thing where Ray Wise is the character who he gets turned into Swamp Thing, and he's sort of figuring out who he is and trying to learn, and it's sort of like this sort of existential crisis that he's going through. Whereas this Swamp Thing is a legit superhero, right? He's buff, he's big, he's got a very self-assured voice. His voice is much more booming, and it really is a superhero movie in that sense. Whereas I think the original Swamp Thing is kind of more Wes Craven, kind of almost doing, I don't want to say like a horror movie, but it's almost like a character study. There's action elements in it, but it's not like this where it's like, again, I don't know that this is quite the same level as Fred Olen Ray's Inferno with the amount of action in it, but it definitely feels more like you're moving from panel to panel almost when you watch this movie.
Yeah, I mean, I think with the first Swamp Thing, it's kind of like has its foot in two worlds. The one foot, Wes Craven trying to put his stamp on a superhero movie. On the other foot, it's trying to be a superhero movie, and it just doesn't quite get there. And I think there's a lot of behind the scenes kind of strife with that. And I think it was a troubled production, and it's one of those movies that's like close but no cigar. But whereas Return of the Swamp Thing, I mean, from the opening minutes, when you have like the Leech Man attack,
Yes.
And it's guys in rubber suits beating the crap out of each other, and it's presented in a fashion where you can see all the action, and Wynorski can shoot action. He's not like one of these, early 2000 guys with a shaky cam, and you only see elbows and knees, on the fight scenes. And I think that it sets the tone perfectly, like you said, with the comic book opening. And they even use the lettering from Not of This Earth. It's the same, Not of This Earth font.
Yeah, I thought that was really great too.
It's got to be fun.
Sorry about that.
No, you're good.
Oh, yeah. It's interesting, like what you mentioned about like kind of with Wynorski. It's almost like the difference between, because you mentioned the Captain America movie that Pune did, and when I think of those two, because I think a lot of people think of these two, kind of almost together, because they're both like low budget versions of, comic book films. But it's almost like Pyun, when he's given Captain America on a budget, he doesn't quite know when to pull back, right? He wants to try to push it as much as he can and make it as big as he can. Whereas Wynorski's like, yeah, you give me 30 days to do it. I think the trivia said he did it in 27. He just kind of knows where his space, he knows what he's, what he's about, and he just kind of makes the film there. I think that's always the kind of thing with Pyun, is that Pyun always had these grander visions of what he wanted to make, which I think made his films more than what the average DTV film was. Whereas like Wynorski, he knows what he brings to the table, and he just does it. He just kind of gets it out there and makes it a really fun movie.
Yeah, I mean, it moves like lightning. I mean, it never stops. There's all, and it kind of goes back to the kind of styling it like a Skinamax movie. There's always a monster fight, or him beating up a guard every few minutes or so. And there's even like a Skinamax style, love scene between, Swamp Thing in his human form with Heather Locklear. And Heather Locklear is amazing in this movie. I don't know how she didn't become a bigger thing, because she's given some kind of really ridiculous dialogue, but she sells it, and it's like you could almost see her playing like a the fast talking kind of like earlier version of like Lois Lane, like in how she was portrayed like in the television series, where it's just kind of like it takes a certain style and kind of like way to recite dialogue like that. Like when she's introduced talking to her house plants, and we buy it. We're like, okay. And that's only there to sell the fact that she's a vegetarian that would consider having sex with Swamp Thing.
Right, exactly. So I think what happens is that make sure that this was the right show. So because she had just come off of Dynasty, I think, or maybe Dynasty was overlapping with this at the same time. So that's probably part of it, right? Is that she's a soap opera actress. We can't take her that seriously. So she gets into Return of Swamp Thing, and then I think there was a sitcom. I think this is the one I'm picking out, called Going Places. I think that's the one. It used to be on Friday nights on ABC. I think that's the one. But yeah, I think she kind of bounced around a bit, and then I think maybe for whatever reason she wasn't getting the roles that she wanted to. She was sort of typecast into this soap opera thing, and then she gets into Melrose Place, kind of only a few years later, like I guess like 93, is because Melrose Place was faltering when it first started, as sort of like, I don't know if it was like a spinoff of 902, and if they considered it an actual spinoff, or it was just sort of like supposed to be on the same night, but it was dying. And then they bring Heather Locklear, and she suddenly just breathes life into it and just makes it into this much bigger thing. But I think that's what happened with hers. I think she got typecast as a nighttime soap actress, but still a soap actress.
Well, it's also funny too, because she got her start on T.J. Hooker, so then she makes the T.J. Hooker reference in the movie, right, which is definitely a Wynorski touch of throwing in an in joke. Yeah,
that was perfect. I remember catching that because she was talking about how she wanted to tape it, or she wanted to make sure it was on to watch it. It's almost like you said, like it's almost like Heather Locklear didn't feel like she was slumming it in this movie. She was like, whatever Wynorski's going for, I'm in, and she just kind of went with it. And I think that adds a level to this movie that I don't think would have been there if she hadn't bought into that degree.
Yeah, and her background's in television, so her it probably was simpatico with Wynorski's shooting style of cranking it out as fast as possible, getting as many setups in your day. And I'm sure, she had pages of dialogue. Like I said, that opening scene is only in a few takes, or it's like one long take, but they have a couple cutaways to her assistant or whatever. And it's like she probably nailed that every single time because of her background, and probably gave Wynorski a lot of choices in the editing room which way to go.
Yeah, no, that's a good point, because that was like, she just does like a whole, like kind of just like this almost like soliloquy, and then her coworker at the plant store is just watching TV, just sort of like rolling her eyes at her because she's just kind of going off on this big long thing. And you're right, it is, they're kind of big longer takes that yeah, and for someone like Wynorski who likes to shoot quick and get it done, she would have had to have gotten that done quickly on she couldn't have taken that many takes with it.
Yeah, and then I mean, even not many people can kind of try to seduce Swamp Thing and make it believable. But there's like this innocence about her, in their swamp scenes that, I mean, Adrienne Barbeau, I think did a good job too. But she's leaning more into kind of the comic booky, kind of poppy kind of feel that Wynorski was going for, and I think she just nailed it. I mean, every scene she's in, I mean, it really pops because of her presence.
Yeah, I totally agree there. Now the other big name, or the other big female name in this is Sarah Douglas, who of course from Superman 2. And so it's interesting to see like another. I don't know if they did make any references to that in the film, that she was also in Superman 2, but kind of seeing her kind of back in another DC Comics film.
Yeah, and I mean, perfectly cast. She's a good foil for Louis Jordan, and he kind of hams it up, but it's good because again, it was like that tone that Wynorski was going for. And, he's got these little quips and stuff, and some of them land better than others, and like talking to his parrot, but it's in total, in line with the film. And I think Sarah Douglas, like, if you need, the smart but sexy scheming scientist, perfectly cast.
Yeah, and it's funny you mentioned Jordan, because I in the trivia section on IMDb, so you've got Miss Poinsettia, who's played by Monique Gabrielle, who is kind of a Wynorski mainstay, especially his more racier films or his Skidabax types. And her character, Miss Poinsettia, was supposed to be nicknamed Points. That was supposed to be a reference to her boobs. And I guess Jordan was like, "No, I'm not doing that." And so, according to the trivia, Wynorski said, "Well, weren't you just in a movie called Octopussy?" And I guess like Jordan wouldn't talk to him again for much of the shooting after that. So you don't really catch any of that in there, but it's funny to kind of hear like that Wynorski again just being like, "Well, really you have that much big of a deal with that?" But it kind of gets to that point that you're either all in or you're not with Wynorski kind of movies. You either kind of get who you're working with or you don't.
Right, and it's funny. Like, I've heard that story. If all your listeners need to follow Wynorski and Ray on Facebook, because a lot of times, like, I mean, Wynorski is at that point in his career. He doesn't care. He'll gossip about starlets that he's worked with and the people who he worked with that he likes and doesn't like, and Ray will actually post a lot of like kind of behind the scenes stuff, like foreshortening and forced perspective, ways to make it look like the city's in rubble when basically all you have is a crumpled up newspaper and a cop car in the foreground. But yeah, I heard that story about Jordan, but like you said, it doesn't translate on film. He's definitely chewing the scenery, and when you can't chew the scenery too much when there's like a half alligator, half elephant, and one thing, I mean, that makeup effects amazing. I mean, they did a great job. And Swamp Thing looks so much better than he did in the first one, where it kind of looks like he got a pair of pajamas that kind of got caught in the lint trap, and it just almost works, but not quite. And we're here, almost the vegetation and everything on his suit almost looks like it's moving at times, and it's just. It's just a great upgrade, and a direct. You wouldn't think going from Wes Craven to Jim Wynorski would be an upgrade, but it truly is. I think on just about every level.
Yeah, that's one thing I think about Wynorski, is that he really leaned into the comic book aspect of this film. I think that's why the two kids in the film work so well too, because it's almost like these kids are almost like comic, kind of taking me back to myself as a kid, going to collect comic books and get them at the store and wanting to read them. Like the whole feel of it, like it's almost like he takes himself back to being a comic book fan himself, which I'm assuming if he wasn't a comic book fan, then he definitely did a good job of playing a comic book fan in making this movie.
Yeah, I mean, and I think it also goes back, his love of 50s and 60s monster movies too. Mad Scientist, there's always a rubber monster fight in the movie. There's the Mad Scientist lab. There's definitely a 50s sci-fi vibe to it, and kind of goes back to the Corman thing, like almost Attack of the Giant Leeches, kind of, with the giant leech man. And it's, I think it's a good marriage of like that 50s sci-fi sensibility with 80s comic book. I mean, and I think in the way that I think he was hired kind of on the same basis that Wes Craven was hired. I think he was kind of like, Wes Craven at the time was the horror guy. So let's get him to do Swamp Thing. And, Wynorski was coming off a Chopping Mall. Yeah. And that tone, they would make a good double feature because there's a tongue-in-cheek atmosphere about it where it's, like I said, I mean, it goes back to just being fun. It's a fun movie, and it just checks all the boxes.
Yeah, no, you make a great point, because like even like you talked about, like those sort of like those, that Louis Jourdan and the other two scientists, one played by Sarah Douglas, they're doing experiments on people to try to recreate Swamp Thing, right? That's what they're doing in this sort of this mad scientist layer that, like you said, it's like a throwback to the 50s and 60s, mad scientist layer. But what's funny is like Wynorski kind of turns up the tongue in cheek with that mad scientist layer, where like, like you said, like there's like the half elephant, half person, and there's a few others that are kind of these grotesque combinations that in a 50s or 60s movie, that would like be the big reveal, right? Like some woman, goes down, gets captured by the mad scientist, and he's like, oh, why don't I show you what I've been working on? And then she sees it, she screams, and then and it's like kind of the dun 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 when they're showing the kind of this hybrid human animal thing that's just completely grotesque. Whereas like he's just kind of putting it out there, like, there you go, look what they're doing, like they're trying to do these experiments and they keep screwing them up, and here you go. And it kind of, for me, I generally don't like that kind of thing, but I got a kick out of it. I thought it was funny the way he did it, and there is that sort of like that sixth sense of humor that Wynorski has that comes through in this as well.
Yeah, it's just like another day at the office. Another failed attempt. And even when the guards, get shot or whatever, they just put them on the slab. There's no, it's just like it's just all experiments to him. And I think Jourdan, that flippant kind of narcissistic flair that he brought to the role, was a good fit.
Yeah, for sure. Because I didn't think when I watched Return of Swamp Thing, I was thinking of Wynorski as the Wynorski that I know, who's done like tons of movies. But you're right. When I hadn't thought of it, that when you look at his filmography, this is only his sixth movie. Right, you're like, I mean, it's only a few years after Chopping Mall. You've got Deathstalker 2. You've got, Not of This Earth, of course, comes right before this, where he uses the same credit sequence. So yeah, I'm thinking of Wynorski as the Wynorski that I know now, but that's not who he was at that time. He was kind of just starting out, and hadn't quite gotten to that role. I mean, you see, when you get into the 90s, that's when he starts pumping out 3 or 4 movies a year. He hadn't quite gotten to that level yet.
Yeah, and it's an interesting kind of what if. I mean, what if Return of Swamp Thing was a hit, and would he have gotten to dip his toe into other DC or Marvel properties or work with bigger budgets? Who's to say? But I think even working in something that wasn't usually his wheelhouse, like a household, well, not really household name, but like a big name property, he still brought that Wynorski sensibility. He brought, like you said, Monique Gabrielle into the role of the sexy henchwoman, but he also gives it his own spin. As like I've said before, Wynorski and Ray, they kind of go to that Russ Meyer sensibility of, and Andy Sedaris has it too, where the women in the cast are usually not only beautiful, but they're usually kind of smarter and tougher than their male counterparts. And we have that with Joey Segal as kind of the head of Arcane's security, and he's kind of this joking buffoon, where Monique Gabrielle kind of does like all the heavy lifting. And it's kind of cool to see, even early on, Wynorski was kind of having these themes in his films.
Yeah, that's a really great point that you mentioned that, because I didn't even consider that myself. But you're right. Like, the three kind of smartest characters in the movie are Heather Locklear's character, Sarah Douglas's character, and then Monique Gabrielle, where she's making fun of the other guy there, who's the head of security, and she's making fun of him, for Joey Segal, and yeah, like Sarah Douglas, it turns out that like part of Louis Jourdan's plan is he needs to use her blood, which is she's going to die if he does it. And she susses out the plan and ends up kind of almost being a partial ally to Heather Locklear's character in it. And yeah, I didn't put that together, that there's that piece that's similar to the Andy Sidaris films where, yeah, everybody thinks of those movies as sort of exploitative of women, but you're right. The women tend to be the stronger characters. They're the ones who are the ones taking advantage of the men. I mean, even in this film with Swamp Thing being the hero as the main guy, after him, and I guess Louis Jourdan to some extent, after that, it's the women who are the strongest characters.
Yeah, and another funny touch too. I mean, between Gabrielle and Segal, they do like this the scene where they get interrupted, but they're trying to do a little seduction thing when they're showing each other their scars. Yeah. And I gotta say, they must have the makers of Lethal Weapon 3 saw this when they were writing that, because it's almost identical to the scene in Return of Swamp Thing where they're looking at their scars as like a point of seduction.
Yeah, and what I love too about the way Wynorski does that is it's kind of like when we were, I know my friends and I, when we were growing up, we would always joke about like, oh, I got this in Grenada or something like that, because those were like kind of like the major military conflicts that happened in the 80s. And it was funny how they almost like Wynorski was using like all of the ones that were on the news, between 1980 and 1989, that whatever small military incursions that the U.S. was involved in, they listed almost every one of them there in that scene.
Yeah, it goes from Grenada to Beirut to Motley Crue concert.
That's right. She has the bite marks, and she's like, "Yeah, that was a Motley Crue concert." That's right.
And yeah. I mean, and that's a pure Wynorski touch right there. I mean, it's him putting his own spin on Swamp Thing, and it's just one of those things where, I mean, as a fan of his work, you go back to, and even like, his smaller movies, it still has like that whole Wynorski touch to it.
Yeah, it's really undeniable. And I think, like looking at sort of the modern comic book movie, and like you said, the modern comic book movie still kind of gets poo-pooed. I think now, right, it gets made fun of now, or not made fun of, but it's sort of like not seen as like real movie making, because they're these huge, I don't know if monstrosity is the right word, but they're these big, like, 2.5 hour plus, just sort of, multi-billion-dollar extravaganzas, or hundreds of $millions extravaganzas, and people look at it as like, oh, well, that's not really movie making. And I think what's great about Swamp Thing is that you come back to something that's an hour and a half long, but it still feels like a comic book movie. It hits all the notes that you'd want in a comic book movie, and it's almost like a feel of, like, for me, like, yes, I do. There are Marvel movies that I like, and I know also they're doing like the Marvel TV series, which I think some of those are good as well. But there is a place for this sort of more like, smaller scale comic book movie that, I think Wynorski shows here that it can be done, and it can still be really fun and worth checking out.
Yeah, and I mean, you look at the director's cut of Justice League, it's 4 hours long, and it really didn't need to be. This is like 87 minutes. There's not a wasted beat or a false moment. Every scene feeds into the next one. It has to be there, and it's just the, tight editing, fast pacing. I mean, it like I said, it checks all the boxes. I mean, it's just, forget it's a comic book movie. It's just a fun movie.
Yeah, and you're right. Like, because when you think of it both as a comic book movie or as something coming from that tradition of like the 50s and 60s mad scientist movie that, you'd watch an MST3K, where it might have like, Peter Graves or somebody like that starring in it. And coming from that tradition as well, you're right. Like it hits a lot of different notes that makes it that fun.
Yeah, and I think that, I mean, that just goes what we were saying before. Wynorski and Ray kind of do they dabble in all these genres, but it's cool when they get like a film like this where they can put all those genres, kind of put all those pieces together, and it's kind of like the tapestry of the film.
Yeah, yeah, no, that's a really great point too. That it you know, Wynorski kind of pulls from a lot of different places to make this work, and I mean, that's one of the things that I like about Fred Olen Ray's Christmas movies that makes them a little bit more than your average Hallmark Christmas movies. He does the same thing. He just it's not as obvious because, you know, he still has to follow that Christmas movie convention, and Hallmark would fire him if he made them too crazy. But it's something that yeah, when you watch any of their movies, whether it's Ray or Wynorski's, it's like some of those things that those little touches that they put into the movie like that, just sort of add to it and make it fun. Which again, when they're working on a budget, it's kind of a way that they can enhance a movie without spending a lot of money.
Yeah, and I mean, you know, if you look at, you know, some of their later movies, like the Skinamax movies, like when Ursi was doing the Bear Wench movies, you know, it's just him with a camcorder and a bunch of naked girls in the woods, and they were able to make 5 of those because of his, you know, just kind of like ingenuity of being able to just kind of pull off these like kind of I I I can't say it's exploitative of the women. I mean, how many found footage movies were there at that time? And he's poking fun at that kind of that groundwork while making something that's very distinctly Wynorski. I mean, not many directors can make a chocolate syrup orgy in the middle of a stream like Jim Wynorski.
Right. No, that's a really great point because, yeah, like the found footage movie, it's like, you know, you're right. Like when after Blair Witch came out, it was like everybody was doing these found footage movies, and they got to be a little bit difficult to watch. But he takes the convention and puts enough of other things in it, and then, you know, he's got these actresses who are completely bought into what he's doing, and they're enjoying the process that he's going through here, and so you get this like really fun spoof on the genre, but that also, not only is it a spoof on those movies, but it also ends up being better than those movies. Like the techniques that he uses to make it almost elevates a genre that it could be a little bit pedestrian at times.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think he, you know, he grew up in that era of like Mad Magazine.
Yeah.
And I think there's definitely a Mad Magazine kind of vibe to a lot of his movies, you know, like the kind of little asides that characters will make, or just kind of like the not gratuitously winking at the audience, but I love pulling back the curtain to say, you know, we're in on the joke. I mean, look at something like Transylvania Twist, where it's a homage to almost like a Mad magazine parody of a Dracula movie, and even what, like when you look at like his early work, like The Lost Empire, it's like one of those movies where it has everything but the kitchen sink in it, and it's just kind of it's always fun to see where he's going to draw kind of inspiration from.
Yeah, no, I agree with you there, and it's kind of fun as a moviegoer to see if you catch it, right? To be like, oh, you know, that looks like, you know, and sometimes that's where it can come in, where like if you're watching a lot of like MST3K, where, you know, they're doing a lot of movies from the 50s and 60s and they're making fun of them or whatever, it's kind of fun to then turn around and watch a Wynorski film or a Fred Olen Ray film and see something that's reminiscent of something from one of those 50s movies that the Joel and the Bots or Mike and the Bots are making fun of.
Yeah, and it's a different way. I mean, to kind of homage it, but whereas they're kind of making fun of it, Wynorski and Ray are making things in the very spirit of it. I think, you know, they've worked closely with Corman, you know, for decades, and Corman, I think, is the most misdeed filmmaker of all time. So, you know, for them, you know, and I think the new season of MST, they're going to be riffing Munchie, which should be, that was directed by Wynorski. So that'll be kind of interesting to see that kind of crossover. And but yeah, I mean, on one hand, a lot of what he does is a very loving kind of in-jokey, like, especially like on the credits. Like if you watch a lot of these credits, it's obvious there was only about 10 people on the crew, if that. But it's spotting kind of the fake names that he throws in there. Like he'll put Wilbur Gray and Chick Young, which are the character names from Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein, or he'll put characters from Good, the Bad, the Ugly in the credits. And it's you always stay through the credits of a Wynorski movie because he's always kind of, to the very last frame, still making these references and just, having a good time.
Yeah, no, that's a really great point. Not wanting to catch some of those things. I mean, some of the names that he uses. For Bad Business, he used the name Bob E, the letter E Brown, and so of course Bobby Brown. It's like whether it's the performer or the video, the heavy metal or hair metal actress or woman who's in the hair metal videos. It's kind of funny that like he'll use a name like that and like Fred Olen Ray, he had a ton of different names. Jay Andrews, Harold Blueberry. He definitely used a lot of different names too.
I mean, and even it's funny too how they take their own sensibilities and their own kind of pop culture, their love of pop culture, and they'll kind of sprinkle it throughout their movies. Like, an example is like, it's really funny too how you'll see the video box for Hard to Die, and it looks like it's going to be this female Die Hard ripoff, and it's basically Wynorski's id unleashed. It's women in lingerie shooting the fact janitor, and it's excuses for them to get in and out of lingerie. And it's so funny when you see like Jim taking something that say, okay, well, we need you to make a Die Hard ripoff, and he's like, well, I'm just gonna make a Jim Wynorski movie. How about that? And that video box art was probably made before the movie was even made. So it's like, so it's going out under that title no matter what. So
yeah, and I mean the thing too, right, with Hard to Die is that you've got Peter Spellos in there, and it's almost like too with Peter Spellos where it's like, I think Wynorski, just like, hey, I need you to do this. And he's like, yeah, all right, I'll do it. And so it's like, yeah, they kind of put him through the ringer in that film. And he's like, yeah, put me through the ringer. I'm ready for it.
Yeah, and he turns up in, he cross-pollinates in both of their films. And Jim and Fred's films. It's always, like I said, it's always fun to see their stock company of actors popping up.
Yeah. And of course, Hard to Die too, he's credited as Art Stanton in that one, so it's wonder he doesn't use his name for. That one is a great one. That one, of course, has some other mainstays. It's Melissa Moore is in it, Deborah Dutch. It's a, those movies. You're right. Like it has the sense, right, of like, okay, it's going to be like exploitative, where these girls in lingerie are going to be victimized, and it is kind of funny how he takes that victimization or that mindset that we have going in, that it's going to be these women victimized for, what is the movie, like 80 something minutes, something like 80 minutes long, when in fact, no, they're not the ones being victimized. It's Peter Spellos who's the one who gets victimized for the entire film.
Absolutely. You hit the nail on the hammer. I mean, that's just, I think Not of This Earth might be my favorite, but, Hard to Die comes in close second for Wynorski's films. Yeah,
it's a great approach, I think, to I think we talked about this when you were on for the Sedaris films, that it's a kind of a similar thing, that you're watching this and it's like, okay, there's Donna Spear or Julie Strain, and they're like the strongest characters in the movie, and so yes, there's this mindset. Of course, you're seeing topless women in hot tubs, or women doing nude scenes and things like that. And it's like, okay, yes, that's a great part of the film to watch. But it's almost like Sedaris and Wynorski as well. They kind of almost like they package the stronger female characters in that piece, or almost like, maybe it's almost a better way to think of it is that they're not saying that those two things have to be mutually exclusive. Like, you can't have a movie with a bunch of naked women and also have a movie where they're all strong women. You know, they're saying like, no, we can do both. We can make it that the male characters are the bumbling ones who get, you know, beaten up and shot and all of those things, and still have the female characters, you know, showing off their assets or what have you.
And I think Ray does this a lot too. And I think it all kind of comes down to hiring that male lead that looks like under some circumstances he could be that competent lead, but usually in this particular one he isn't. Like Jay Richardson. It's always kind of pops up in Ray's work. Like, I mean, you look at Hollywood Chainsaw Hookers, where he's kind of in that Sam Spade private detective mold, where he's just, you know, he's the one that at the end is wind up tied up, and you know, Linnea Quigley has to save him.
Right.
So it's always neat to see how they flip that kind of boilerplate idea and flip it on its ear and give you something, you know, really kind of sexy too. I mean, they portray the women, you know, that sex is part of the package. That's not we're not just there to look at them. They are smart, they're capable, they're badass, and it's just another ingredient.
Yeah, and I think too with some of the women who were in these movies, like a Julie K. Smith, Donna Spear in the Sidaris films, Julie Strain, where they kind of get this. There was, I think, one of the things that people today, especially younger people, might not realize, that back in the 80s, if you did Playboy, that was kind of it. Like that was, you know, pre Pamela Anderson, pre Vanessa Williams kind of making a transition from that into a mainstream career. It was like, well, no, if you do those movies, or if you do a spread in Playboy or spread in Penthouse or something, then that's it. You can't get into any kind of mainstream films. Like nobody's going to want you. And so then that's where, you know, Sidaris comes in, or Wynorski, where they're making movies with these women, and yeah, they're doing their nude scenes, they're doing those kinds of things, but it's almost like they're showing like, yeah, you know, it's you're lost by not having these women in these films, because they can do a lot more than just nude scenes, and they're more than just Playboy centerfolds. And that's one thing I've always appreciated. I think something I didn't appreciate when I watched the Sidaris films when I was first seeing them, you know, on, you know, late at night on TV in the 90s and early 2000s. But then when I rewatched them for our podcast last year, it kind of gave me a new appreciation for what Sidaris was doing.
Yeah, and I mean, even in like kind of the standard genre work, like the working within the erotic thriller frame, Wynorski and Ray's films, they're usually, there might be that one victim early on that kind of sets the plot in motion, like she gets killed and then the detectives hire. I think Victim of Desire, Virtual Desire kind of follow that kind of setup. But you might get one woman who is victimized, but just at the behest of just kind of kickstarting the plot. But the rest of the women that kind of follow suit are always kind of tough, capable, likable, and it really speaks to the women who are in these movies from, you know, time and again, Julie K. Smith, Julie Strain, that they can just come in and, you know, and they don't really work for a whole lot of other actors, it seems like, once they get of a certain age. But Ray and Wynorski continue to use them, well into the 21st century.
Yeah, and I think what I really liked about with Return of the Swamp Thing, in thinking of that sort of that tradition, was that, you know, Heather Locklear worked really well in that, and maybe, you know, and obviously she's not doing nude scenes or anything like that, but I wonder if maybe there is a mindset from her of being like typecast in soap opera films, or, you know, being the beautiful co-star to William Shatner and T.J. Hooker, and it's like, well, you know, when am I going to get a role where I can actually do something? And here's Wynorski saying, yeah, here, I'm going to, you know, yes, normally, right, the female lead in a comic book movie is really just there to be the damsel in distress and be the love interest for the hero, and almost kind of be like the emotional piece of the hero. Like the hero can't get in touch with their emotions, but the female character, she can be emotional. And Wynorski's like, no, you know, this is what I do with female characters in my movies. This is kind of the scope that I give them, and she really leans into it, and the same way that like a Julie K. Smith or a Julie Strain does in some of those other Wynorski films.
Yeah, I mean, and Heather Locklear does a great job of kind of, and her little one-liners. It's almost like Groucho Marx. When she's being led away from by the guard, she's still dropping one-liners, and to the very end, she's quipping away, which is a very tough and feisty uh, heroine that just happens to look like the beautiful Heather Locklear. And you almost see it in her eyes. She's just like thrilled to be there, and the way she rattles off her dialogue. I mean, it's just like she's just like loving being in Return of the Swamp Thing.
Yeah, one thing's actually kind of funny when I was reading the trivia is that her love scene with that actor, I guess that guy was not credited because he didn't have any lines. He wasn't Dick Durock. He was somebody else. That they was like some kind of male model that they just had show up for that scene, and so she didn't like him because she thought he was arrogant, and so she just did the scene anyway just to do it and get it over with. And then of course Wynorski paid him and he was done. Or whoever paid him, whoever on the set paid him. But it's interesting that was the one thing she didn't like, was doing this love scene with this male model because he was a jerk. Whereas like everything else, it seems like she was enjoying herself.
Well, I mean that kind of that tracks, because if he was just brought in for one day, he probably wasn't close to the production with everybody else. And I think when they make, when Wynorski and Ray make these movies, for a lot of the people, I'm sure it's like going to camp. Yeah. They use the same a lot of the same crew again and again, a lot of the same actors again and again, and it's just like I can imagine somebody like a Jay Richardson or Ross Hagen sitting by the phone, and they get the phone call, say, hey, we're making a movie, and they probably drop everything they do just to support it, because I mean, you wouldn't make movies for the same director for 40 years if they didn't have a good environment to work in.
Yeah, you make a great point, because I know when I posted on Instagram about Sniper Special Ops, and I posted the picture of Tim Abel instead of Seagal because I was like, well, Tim Abel did the heavy lifting. Yeah, Tim Abel actually responded to the post, and he's like, yeah, I love making movies with my buddy Fred. So there it is right there. And I think Fred Olin Ray looks at, I've got to make this Seagal movie, but I need someone to do the heavy lifting because Seagal just wants to sit the entire time. So who am I going to get? And of course, it's a military film, so Abel, I think he was a Ranger in I know he served in the military, but I think he may have even been on one of the Rangers. But it's like, let me call Tim Abel and my buddy and have him come in. And of course, Abel does all the heavy lifting. He's like the main character in the film. But yeah, that was his comment, was I love making movies with my buddy Fred. So yeah, I think to your point that it must be a great environment for them.
Yeah, and especially from like, I guess, late 90s on, like Tim Abel is basically kind of like I always kind of see him as like the Fred Olin Ray substitute. Like Fred could be in his movie, he cast like Tim Abel as like kind of like the pseudo Fred Olin Ray, because he's like they kind of resemble each other kind of physically a little bit, but like you always see him as kind of like like you said, the secondary lead, but who's basically the lead if his name was Steven Seagal or Michael Dudikoff or something. You know what I mean?
Yeah. What I love about Sniper Special Ops is that they had Rob Van Dam, the wrestler, in it, and they put Seagal and then Van Dam, and of course it's like, it's not spelled the same, but I think it's meant to be like, oh wow, Seagal and Van Dam, which of course I don't think Seagal likes Van Dam, so I don't think he would do a movie with Van Dam, but I just always love that cover where it's like there's Seagal and it's like his head on somebody else's body, and then on the top Seagal, Van Dam, and it's like all those kind of like cheap things, but then here's Fred Olin Ray, making it into something that was like a little bit better than just some sort of schlock Seagal film.
I think they refer to that box art as king shit. Because I mean, you can tell some old grandpa got suckered into renting that, thinking that Jean-Claude Van Damme was in it, right. And he wasn't, and he probably didn't even realize the mistake till the movie was over.
Yeah,
but it's good that you bring up Rob Van Dam, because Fred Olin Ray has a background in wrestling as Freddie Valentine, and I think that kind of like the independent circuit of wrestling, like that mentality of let's put on a show, translates to film. We don't have the money or the time or of the big boys, but we're going to give you that bang for your buck, at a bargain price. And I think the world of wrestling and kind of film, low budget filmmaking, is that same guerrilla attitude.
Yeah, especially like that '80s period when at that time they were WWF, but WWF and WCW hadn't really like gotten that sort of stranglehold on wrestling at that point. So these independents, if they could generate enough buzz, they could get on TV themselves. If it was like maybe TV in that local market, there were a lot of independent channels at that time too that were looking for programming, and so yeah, there was you're right. Like if you could put on the best kind of show for wrestling in the '80s, you could get something. You could get traction somewhere, and it's kind of almost the way that you think of direct to video movies in the '90s, where it's like if you put on something good enough, you get traction in the video store or traction on cable channels.
Yeah, and I mean, oftentimes, those independent wrestling associations, they would have like one guy or two guys that were kind of over the hill past their prime, but they were still names, and they could draw in an audience with that name. And you look at something like what Fred did, like Armed Response with David Carradine and Lee Van Cleef. There's your two kind of older names to bring in the crowd, and then we're going to populate the rest of the feature with kind of up and coming people. And it's kind of interesting how that kind of mirrors those sensibilities mirror each other.
Yeah, no, you make a great point, especially Fred Olen Ray. If you look at a lot of his action movies in the '90s, you see a lot of that kind of thing where it's like, okay, here's was it Air Boss? I'm trying to think if I get the right name. Or Air Rage or something. It's the one that has Air Rage. That's what it is. Air Rage with Ice-T in it, and it's you get those names on the box like that, but then you get his sort of the ones that he's used to working with as well. And so yeah, it's always kind of fun to watch a movie like that, to see like the big name in there, and then who else is going to be in it, like Brinket Stevenson or Hoke Howell or whoever is going to be along for the ride.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting to see what the box art promises and what Fred Olen Ray delivers. And when I say delivers, I don't mean as a backend way. I mean what he delivers as a Fred Olen Ray filmmaker, the filmmaker Fred Olen Ray. So you're lured in by the promise of an Ice-T or a Michael Dudikoff, and then you get about 20 minutes into it, and you're, oh, this is just a Fred Olen Ray movie. All right,
Yes.
Yeah, kind of like with Inferno. It's like this looks like it's gonna be a Blood Fist ripoff. Oh no, wait, this is a Fred Olen Ray movie through and through. Awesome.
Yeah, and I think what I love too is it's almost like when I remember watching The Wrong Child, a David Dakota film that had Gary Daniels in it, so that's why I watched it. But it also had Vivica A. Fox, who does a ton of those David Dakota movies, and it's almost like she has done enough of those movies with David Dakota that she knows everything that he needs to do to get that movie done on time. And it's almost like, especially at the end when like all the loose ends are flying together, and us as the viewer, we've got our eye protection on to make sure we don't get hit with anything. But she's almost like Neo in the Matrix, like moving around and like managing to get all these plot things together. And I almost think it's probably the same thing for Fred Olen Ray and Wynorski, that they've got their mainstays, and it's like, okay, I've been signed up to do this Seagal movie, or I've been signed up to do this Ice-T movie, or whoever is in it. Okay, I need to get as many of my actors and actresses that I know my style in, so we can get this thing done in on time and in under budget. And it's almost like he knows he can count on them to do those scenes, that they can get those scenes done quickly, one take, two takes, whatever it takes. And I think it's an interesting combination that I think a lot of these, I imagine a lot of these directors, I mean, Albert Pyun had a bunch of his mainstays too, that you must, like, over time when you're trying to get these films done quickly, who can do it and who can't. And you almost sort of, lean on them to anchor your film.
And I think that goes back to like the Corman days of, Roger Corman putting in like a Dick Miller, Jonathan Hayes, Mel Wells, like, these guys that can hit their marks. They can do what they, normally do and do it well. And probably at the end of the day, still probably haul equipment from from the set to the truck. And I think that's, a lot of those guys that they work, like Tim Abel and, a lot of the other supporting players, they probably do a lot behind the scenes as well that, we probably would never think about. They might even coordinate the hotel accommodations. Who knows? Because half of the credits are probably false on one of those films.
Right. Or like when you see producer next to their names, producer can mean any number of things, right? When they get that producer credit.
Yeah, I mean, typically it means, they didn't get any money for it, so they're a producer. But you're absolutely right. If you have a Seagal that comes in for a day, or like I think one of the kind of notable things, notable instances is Ticker for Pyeon, when I think Dennis Hopper did all his scenes in a day.
Yes.
In a phone booth, and they wrapped before lunch, and he was like, "Wait, we're done?" Like, yeah. And I think, like, if you can bring those elements in, like, you'll get a big actor for a day or a weekend, or you're shooting around their television schedule. If you can knock those scenes out and take your time on them, you got that core stable group of actors and crew. They can knock out anything that you need to knock out in a take or two, and get you into your next setup.
Yeah, that's for sure. Because I think, I know, I think Uwe Boll, when he would make his movies, he would like put his production. I guess what he would do is when he was making a movie, he'd reach out to agents and be like, "Okay, who of your stars are between pictures and could use a little extra money?" And I wonder if that's probably the same thing, right? With these DTV, line producers or whatever, they're like, "Okay, who's in between productions that wants a little make a little extra money between their big." Two big screen films, and then it's like, okay, well, here you go, Wynorski or Fred Olen Ray or David Dakota or whoever it is, or Albert Pyon, you've got a week to shoot this if you want to get this actor in between their movies. And you're right, like, okay, so if I've only got a week to do this, and this actor is used to shooting on a longer, broader schedule, they're probably and they're also too that bigger actor is going to want more takes, right? They're gonna, oh no, that doesn't look right, no, I don't want to do, we got to do this again. Whereas whoever it is, Holcal, Brinka Stevens, they're just going to be like, hey, I'm in this movie. I'm happy to be in this movie with this actor. Yeah, whatever. How if you think it's good on that take, then I'll go with it.
And then to even one up that mentality, you have Fred Olen Ray kind of pulling like a Bela Lugosi, Ed Wood situation with John Carradine. He would just film stuff with John Carradine, put in his back pocket, and then even years after Carradine passed away, he was still dropping this footage of John Carradine that he had shot years and years ago, and it's like, oh, and then you can also sell it as, oh, the last picture John Carradine ever made.
Right. Yeah, that's a good point. That's like, was it Richard Harrison, right, when he did the Godfrey Ho? He thought he was going to do 2 Godfrey Ho ninja movies, and ended up being 20 Godfrey Ho ninja movies.
And that's the thing that you have to think about. I don't know what kind of hiring bases they are, because like Corman would hire Karloff for like 6 days, and if they finish the movie in 4 days, well, guess what? You still got 2 days, so we're going to make another movie. Right. And you might not have signed on to make 2 movies, but you're here, so you're going to do it.
Yeah, and I don't know how the SAG guidelines work around that kind of thing. Like in terms of like like, okay, if you're for this, because I know like probably the big thing, right, with SAG is that you can't just use footage of an actor in one movie and not another unless you have some sort of contractual agreement to do that. Whereas you do a non-SAG picture, all bets are off.
Yeah, so I don't know the logistics of it, but I'm sure if there was a loophole, Wynorski and Ray would be the first to take advantage of it.
Yeah, for sure. Well, maybe that's a good place to leave it. But actually, before we wrap up, Mitch, did you have anything else you wanted to say about Fred Olen Ray or Jim Wynorski?
Well, I mean, one thing I wanted to say, it's probably been a decade now, but I did a review of Busty Cops Go Hawaiian, and I said it was probably the greatest Skinamax movie ever made. And Wynorski left a comment on. He didn't leave a comment on my review. He actually emailed me and said, he was very touched. He thanked me for my review, and I always thought that was pretty cool. And then a few years later, was writing my first book, I knew I was going to have to self-publish it, and I knew there wasn't going to be really a hook there. Just me writing reviews. I knew there had to be something more. So I knew, I had Jim Wynorski's contact, and I was like, let me just reach out to see if he'll write an introduction, because a book that says introduction by Jim Wynorski, I mean, that's more than just written by Mitch Lovell. So, and not even like 2 hours later, he had it all written out, and it was very complimentary, and it was just awesome. And I'll always be indebted to Jim Wynorski for taking that time to help me out as a fledgling author. And I can't say enough good things about the man.
Yeah, I think that's awesome. I think that's fantastic. I've never heard from him before, but with Fred Olin Ray, I don't necessarily have a similar story, but I have he did a movie called something about, it was I think it was called American Outlaws, the story of Jesse James, or American Bandits, Frank and Jesse James. And I watched it, and it kind of had this sense of, like, or at least for me when I was watching it, I interpreted it as this sense that, like, it would have been a lot better if the South had won. And they kind of didn't mention, with the Civil War, and they didn't really mention much about slavery. And I was like, this isn't good. And I think I called the movie a disgrace, because I felt like it was kind of like revisionist history. And then, I don't know, however much longer after that, maybe a few weeks later, I did Dinosaur Island, which was the Wynorski and Fred Olin Ray movie together. And Fred Olin Ray commented, he said, "Well, at least I'm known for doing something good." And it kind of told me that he probably read the other review too, and just didn't say anything. It wasn't like he was gonna fight with me or argue with me about it, but it kind of almost let me know that he reads all the reviews, and so the good ones and the bad ones. So it was kind of a reminder for me that, like, when I review movies, that like you said, when you kind of reviewed that one from Wynorski, and he emailed you about it, that, like, yeah, these guys read these reviews, and some, sometimes it's better to probably be, I kind of learned my lesson to be a little bit more understanding of, even if I don't like how a movie goes, to not use as harsh a language as I did in that one, because you never know when a Fred Olin Ray is going to be reading it.
Yeah, and I mean, a lot of times when you look at external reviews on IMDb, a lot of their kind of latter day films, they really don't have a whole lot of external reviews. I think I was the only one on Busty Cops Go Hawaiian, and I know both of those guys have a really good social media presence on Facebook, and I think they are in touch with that, and I think they're aware of their place in history and in cinema history, and I think they're happy with that, and I'm happy with that, because I love their movies. Even the lesser ones are still fun to pick apart and kind of look at from the prism of their film.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely correct, and I think with the kind of movies that we like, that kind of these sort of lower budget, either direct to video or limited indie release films, what the two of them did, or still doing, I shouldn't say did, but what they've done for those kinds of movies, I think these two films that we're talking about today are just indicative of kind of a broader scope. And of course, there's going to be hits and misses along the way, but the fact that they have as many hits as they do, making the films under the constraints that they have, I think is testament to the talents that they are.
Well, I couldn't find a better place to end on than that. I think you pretty much said it all.
Excellent. Well, thank you for that. Yeah, for sure. I think, I think for people out there, I think, I don't know how many films Wynorski and Fred Olin Ray have on Tubi, or other streaming sites like that. But I think for people that aren't as familiar with them, I think chances are you've probably seen some Wynorski and Fred Olin Ray movies and maybe didn't even know it. But they're two directors that you really should get into.
Yeah, absolutely. Especially, it's fun for me, like I said, to go through, kind of chronologically, to see just how many genres and that their work encompasses, and it's just one of those they're one of those guys that you're guaranteed to get not only a fun B movie, but there's a lot of their personality in all that they do.
Yeah, I totally agree, and I think it can even make a Christmas movie more fun than you were expecting.
I saw maybe this Christmas I'll do a Ray Christmas palooza,
Yeah.
and try to do like the 12 Rays of Christmas or something.
That'd be awesome. Yeah. Well, because it's funny, because my wife gets a kick out of those. Like as we get closer to that time of year, she's actually been disappointed because a lot of the Hallmark movies, they're just pumping out new ones. Like they're not really showing ones from the past as much. They're kind of just like, okay, like pretty much every one of them is like 2020, 2021. But it is kind of fun, like almost like an overlap for the two of us, that she likes those schlock Christmas movies, and I can be like, oh, well, I like Fred Olen Ray movies, so we can just do some Fred Olen Ray Christmas movies.
Yeah, and then like Bruce Campbell did a Christmas movie last year, I think, a Hallmark movie. So it's funny how they kind of pull from the B movie talents.
Yeah, I mean, it makes sense when you think about it, right? Because all of these, the Fred Olen Ray one that we watched, I mean, had Lawrence Hilton Jacobs in it. It's like, these actors that are also talented at working, on short schedules and, under budget and getting it done in a couple takes. So yeah, it makes sense that there's a lot of crossover like that now that Hallmark and Lifetime are just pumping out so many of these movies.
And again, I mean, it's a market that needs product, whereas in the 80s, the VHS market needed product. It's and wherever people need product, the Wynorski and Ray are there to churn them out.
Yeah, which is it's just a fantastic thing to see. I think it's a lot of fun when you're looking at the guide bar on the cable box, and it's like, directed by Fred Olen Ray. It's such a cool thing when like, oh, he's done these other movies that we've reviewed on our sites that are that the Christmas movie crowd probably wouldn't want to go near.
Yeah, and it's funny, for every like little old lady wearing her Christmas sweater, baking her cookies. Like, is she aware that the guy that made this Christmas movie also did Hollywood Chainsaw Hookers? And
Yeah, I do kind of like this idea too that Fred Olen Ray and Wynorski, that they've made like X-rated or like R-rated versions of these Christmas movies, that there's uncut versions out there. I hope that that's true. I hope that there's some scenes of these movies that are kind of waiting to be shown someday. But I doubt it. But I think that would be kind of a funny idea.
well, I mean, it's they're still got a lot of career ahead of them, so anything is possible.
Yeah, maybe, hey, if you guys are listening, you guys, that would be a really, we would love to see some R-rated Christmas movies if you could, some Skinamax Christmas movies. Sure.
Yeah, I mean, I'd be I'll be the first one in line to audition as Santa. So
That would be awesome. So, well, Mitch, was there anything that you wanted to plug while we're wrapping up?
Well, as always, everybody can find me on Twitter at the Video Vacuum, and you can read my reviews online at www.thevideovacuum.blogspot.com, and look at my author page on Amazon. And if you want to read more about Wynorski, I have my first book, The Best and Worst of the Video Vacuum, has the introduction written by Jim. And yeah, I think there's even a chapter devoted to Skinamax movies, which I think has a little sampling of both Wynorski and Ray.
Yeah, I think that's yeah. I think people should be checking out your books. I think when you're looking up on Amazon, it's Mitch Lovell with 2 L's at the end. Lovell with 2 L's, because I think for people, cause one of the things I hear from a lot of people with my self-published books is like, I don't have time to read a book. I don't have time to read. And I think for people that have like big movie collections where they may have a lot of DVDs or VHSs or anything like that, your books are a great addition to a movie collection. And it's not like, I think people should read your books cover to cover, but you don't have to necessarily read them cover to cover. They can sort of be reference guides as well. And so I think that's a good way to approach it. I think that, for people that like, if you're thinking about adding to your movie collection, Mitch's books are great additions to your movie collection.
Well, I appreciate that. And, I always try to keep the chapters down to about 5 or 6 movies on a particular subject. Not necessarily always the best ones, but to give you a good cross reference to what the genre has to offer. And, my theory has always been, I try to give, just as much as I would just like to review solely just DTV action or just horror or one particular genre. I really watch all kinds of movies, and that kind of that runs concurrent with the way that Jim and Fred make their movies. They make all kinds of genre pictures, and that's maybe the secret why I love both of their work so much.
Yeah, I agree. I sometimes forget because my blog started out trying to be direct-to-video of all genres. But I think what happened was that the action DTV genre was the one that had like the least coverage in the blogosphere. And I think that's where I started to notice like the action ones were getting the most comments. They were getting the most people saying like, oh, you should try, review this movie, or have you checked out this one? Whereas like, I think horror was getting lost in a sea of a lot more horror, sci-fi, same thing. And for whatever reason, comedy and the erotic thrillers, I think the erotic thrillers for me, part of the problem was in the late 2000s, they weren't as easy to come by. Like you had to get them on VHS. That's starting to change a little bit, but the comedy ones, they almost never got any traction, which comedy DTV for me was like one of the big ones that I just, that was my friends and I were always renting kind of schlock romps at the video store. And I think it's just, for whatever reason, action is the one that people have glommed onto more, and my blog kind of took that focus. But I've always liked all the different DTV genres.
Yeah, and it's on one hand, when it comes to reviewing comedy, it's almost like kind of reviewing horror. It's like the one thing you have to say is like, is it funny?
Yeah.
If you laughed, it's a good movie. At least with horror, you can kind of say, well, the effects were good. It was cool to see this B movie icon in like 2 or 3 scenes, but like comedy kind of just lives and dies by the laughs. And it's probably the trickiest, I wouldn't say the hardest, but the trickiest genre to review, because ultimately it boils down to, did I laugh? Yes. Well, your sensibility, you might laugh at something else. So it's kind of tricky to review.
Yeah, no, that's for sure. And I think it's interesting, like, yeah, when you think of Wynorski and Fred Olen Ray, especially Wynorski, he has a unique sense of humor. I think he kind of almost borders like similar to like Lloyd Kaufman's sense of humor. And yeah, not everybody gets it. That's which is for sure.
Yeah, I mean, and it's which is fun when you're doing a sci-fi movie or a Skinemax movie, or the pepper in that humor to as just another ingredient in the seasoning, but where it's just a comedy, like a bunch of frat guys stealing panties from a sorority house. It's like, well, did I laugh? I somewhat. It'll never be Animal House 2 stars.
Right. Right, exactly. No, that's a good point. Like, yeah, I always loved the ski school movies. Those were some of my, but it's like, yeah, remember like National Lampoons would came out with like a ton of different DTV movies in the late 2000s, I remember. And yeah, it was that was kind of it. Was like, was this movie funny? No, and it's like, and it's hard to do anything with a bad comedy, right? Because it's like, I remember Mystery Science Theater 3000 talked about. I think they talked about that with Catalina Caper, that it's hard to make fun of a comedy because it's like, if the jokes are bad, it's like, okay, the jokes are bad, but it's like you're making fun of something that is trying to be a joke about something, and it's almost like they're almost like, if you make fun of it, it's almost like they're trying to say like you don't get the joke, and it is a little bit more of a challenge.
Yeah, I mean, it's an easier target to say something's funny if it tries to be serious and it fails.
Yeah.
You can drop in a comment or two, but if it's trying to be funny and it isn't, sometimes it can just be a cringe fest.
Right, exactly. So yeah, I see what you mean there. Yeah, with comedy in particular, that it's like some people are gonna like it, some aren't. Whereas like action stuff, I think it's it with the action genre, I think one, there's just not enough people out there writing about it. I think that's part of it, and then especially the older films, and two, you're right. Like I think there's more where people just be like, oh, if you love this one, you're gonna love this one, and there's kind of more of like a building one movie on the other kind of thing.
No, absolutely, especially guys like Dolph and Jean-Claude Van Damme, where they've actually kind of flourished in the DTV market. They've kind of grown older and kind of wiser, and they've delivered some of their better performances later on in their career. And it's kind of fun to kind of chart that trajectory of okay, well, maybe these pictures were a little lacking, but it's fun when they work with certain directors like John Hyams or it's the DTV action market. It's a little bit more kind of open now, I think, and there's a lot more players and a lot more room for interpretation and then critique, really, because you are the DTV connoisseur, and we see stuff that others might not. They just see schlock, but we know if Seagal is standing up and actually punching someone, there's a chance that it might actually be a good movie this time.
Right. That's a good point. Yeah, it's kind of funny. I think back when you were on when we did Altitude, the Dolph Lundgren movie. I think that people went into our podcast episode on that thinking we were going to kill that movie because it's Denise Richards and like, okay, it's, that it can't be that good. And when I think when people found out that we liked it, that we both liked it, and we were both talking about all the really great parts, I think they were a little shocked of like, oh, okay, because I think they were expecting us like to just kind of have a snark fest. But I think you mentioned in that podcast that sometimes with those DTV movies, you grade them on a curve, that you don't treat it the same way that you might treat like the newest Scorsese movie or whatever, and I think that by grading it on a curve, you can almost have more fun with it that way, that you can kind of enjoy the DTV movie for what it was meant to be.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, if you're sitting down to watch Licorice Pizza, what you're grading on is you're grading it against Paul Thomas Anderson's past couple of films.
Yeah.
When you sit down and you watch Altitude, you're not grading it on whether it's going to live up to Boogie Nights. You're grading it on whether it's going to live up to Universal Soldier 5. Yeah. So it's kind of like that. If you keep it in a certain wheelhouse, I think a 3-star review of Altitude is. If I give that 3 stars, it's of that genre, it's probably a 4-star movie. But if you're looking at it as, something like you said, the latest Scorsese movie, it's probably closer to a 2-star. But for a Dolph Lundgren, Denise Richards hijacked airplane movie, I mean, it was 3 stars for me. I enjoyed it.
Yeah, and I think that's the key, right? It's like, and I think Altitude is now available on Tubi. I think when we reviewed it, you had to rent it on Prime, but it's like when you're going through that Tubi queue or that that kind of like this that huge mess of covers, and you're picking a movie to watch, if you can say after that 90 minutes that you had fun, I think that's the most you can ask for.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it kind of comes with tempered expectations a lot of times, but I really love Tubi because Tubi it's just so much stuff, and I get lost in the recommendation section. Like, I'll add one to my queue, and then like I was like, you might also like that. Like, hell yeah, I might also like that. I'll for every one movie I watch, I probably add 8 or 9 to my queue.
I'm the same way. Yeah, it's like I'm never gonna watch all these movies in my lifetime probably, and it's like, yeah, I can't stop adding them. And then the other thing too is like sometimes they take movies down, but if you don't remove them from your queue before they get taken down, if they get added again at some point, they just get put right back into your queue where they were.
Yeah, which is nice. Some other streaming services don't do that, but I really. And Tubi is like user friendly. Like, I mean, like the setup for, I think, Paramount Plus, there was I think Paramount Plus, and there was another big money streamer. I couldn't even navigate it. I'm like, this is garbage. I was like, give me Tubi. Like, it's just it's user and the ads are intrusive, like some, and sometimes there aren't even any ads, and I mean, it's like the mom and pop video store of streamers.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think that's a good point because you're right. Like in terms of like the ads themselves, like I think Pluto and Crackle and those, they tend to be worse with ads. Like it seems like there's ad breaks constantly. And then I think Disney Plus, we just started using Disney Plus, and I know my wife wanted to watch the old Muppet Show. And I think it's because some of those old Muppet Show episodes have themes in them that nowadays would not be considered PC. And they'll kind of put warnings. I think that's why they make it so it's not as easy to find. But you literally, I think you almost have to type in the entire The Muppet Show for it to pop up in the search engine. I think, and so it's like if we, turn off Disney Plus and go do something else and then come back to it, we have to go through this whole process again of searching for it because it doesn't show up as like, oh, you were, continue watching this. Or I think if we do continue watching, we can't go back to the episode list. It's like a whole fugazi thing where like Tubi, you're just right there. Like you've got the episode page, everything is right there. Easy. I mean, I guess Netflix is like that too, but yeah, I mean, I don't know if for the Muppet Show because it has adult themes that they think are inappropriate today. Maybe that's what it is, but because like everybody's smoking or something like that. But yeah, I know what you mean about them not always being as user friendly.
And I mean, too, with Tubi, I think it's just a variety of genre. I mean, they don't discriminate. I mean, there are uh, just like the trashiest B movies are on there right alongside Oscar winners.
Yes.
And it's so funny too because you know it, at some point my recommendations are just like some of the you'll see like a Screwballs 2 like alongside like the Reader or something, and and it's just like that just I mean that speaks to like all the movies I watch, but it just shows that the wealth of movies that they do have.
Yeah, which I think for anybody as a B movie fan, but really just a movie fan, I think Tubi. It is a really fantastic one. I think, and I've been surprised at how much they've been able to keep good stuff on there with all of these companies coming out with their own streaming services that I would imagine would start to pull things away. But I think it's, again, testament to the fact that if you have varied taste and you like a lot of different things, you can find stuff, a lot of stuff, things on a channel like Tubi that has probably a lot of things that fall outside of sort of the main streaming houses, like their properties.
And I know Jim Wynorski, very often on his Facebook page, he'll put up, he'll do a search for his name and he'll put up a picture of all the movies that are available on Tubi directed by him. And I always find one or two gems of his I haven't seen. I'll follow him on social media and be like, oh yeah, I didn't get to watch Poison with Carrie War. I'll go watch that one.
Yeah, I have to follow him on. I'm not good at Facebook, to be honest. I need to be better at Facebook. I tend to do like just go into my blog page that's on there and post the most recent review or podcast. I need to do a better job of like kind of following names like Wynorski and seeing what they've got going on because it's kind of like you said, like especially with Tubi when there's so many things out there. To kind of know that someone like Wynorski, when he says, oh, yeah, this was just added or something like that, you may not see it if you just are browsing. But if he tells you it's there, you can go right for it.
And then I think just like a week ago, he finished filming a movie for Charles Band, Attack of the 60-Foot Cam Girl.
I saw that on his IMDb thing. Yeah.
So I was like, he was posting pictures of the, from the set and everything. And so it's really cool to see him kind of back doing what he does best. And it's kind of fascinating. I mean, he had never worked with Charles Band before. You would thought those two would have been, peas in the pod, but, it's better late than never, I think.
Yeah, because even Pion had done a couple films for bands. So I think he did Dollman and Arcade. So, yeah, so that's interesting that Wynorski hadn't yet.
Yeah, I think think Ray did one or two. I think he did Sideshow.
Oh yes.
And so I mean, and Charles Band's another one of those guys that's just been out there since the '80s and just cranking these things out. And I think their sensibilities are a good fit, especially for if it's going to be going to like the streaming market. I think that's definitely a movie that you and I would stumble upon, and 11 o'clock at night on a Tubi or something, and say, okay, well, we got our beer, we got our pizza. Let's dive into this one.
Yes, yeah, I agree with you for sure there, and I think yeah, it, yeah, I definitely agree. Like it's like that. Yeah, and I'm seeing it right now. That's showing it at full moon. So yeah, so that Sideshow was definitely a Charles Band one. It's like, yeah, when you get these combinations of guys like this, like Band with Wynorski, or I'm sorry, Band with with Wynorski or Fred Olen Ray or Pion, it's always kind of cool to kind of see what they do together, and or Corman obviously working with Wynorski and Fred Olen Ray. It's always kind of cool to see what comes out of those collaborations.
Yeah, and you get a sense like if there is a kind of competitiveness, it's a friendly one.
Yeah.
And they've made films together and pitched in here and there, and it's like I said, like it's hard to talk about one without the other, at least in my mind, because they're such a perfect fit in both sensibilities and both the films they make and the actors that they share.
Yeah, no, I think that's fantastic, and I think it was a great idea that you had that we do both in one episode, because I think the films we picked were good ones to discuss, and that we were able to kind of showcase like the variety of genres that these two work in, and like you said, work in really well. Like that it's almost like they can do just about any genre and do it well, and I think it was a good combination to have both of them in the same podcast.
Oh, absolutely. And I think it you can really chart the market of B movies, direct to video, through their careers. You can look at the kind of the first kind of films that they make were made for theaters. And then eventually in the '80s, they were made for video stores, and then then the DVD market, and then now they're making movies that go straight to streaming or straight to Hallmark. So you can chart the whole Hollywood B movie genre just from their work.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. It's almost like a kind of a forensic thing, right? Where you can sort of go onto their IMDb page and see what was big at different times. And I think, for us, for people our age, we can do it and be like, almost like kind of reminisce, like, oh, I remember, like pay-per-view had a lot of these kind of movies or that kind of thing. But also someone who's younger, who may have been born in the '90s, who's kind of coming into these kind of films, I think it's sometimes hard to get a sense of like what a decade was like if you weren't, living in it and kind of growing up in it. Kind of like for myself, trying to think about what the '70s was like, you kind of take in like TV shows and stuff like that, but it only gives you so much of an idea of what a decade was really like. But this is a way that you can really get a sense of it. Like, what was the video store era like? What were cable TV like? That you can especially with these two, and I think you can throw in probably David Dakota was another name that you can kind of get a sense of it, of what was big at those times. Almost like you're sort of digging in as a forensic, I don't know, archaeologist, or I guess, or an anthropologist.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, Dakota's another one of those guys that start off, making low budget horror movies and then kind of filling in the gaps of, doing like kung fu and various other genres, and now doing Lifetime movies, but along the way making very uh movies that only David Dakota would make, like Bigfoot versus DB Cooper. I mean, like he puts his stamp on every movie that he makes, and you're watching a Dakota movie when you're watching a Dakota movie.
Yeah, for sure. I think we covered him when we did Santa's, what was it? Santa's Summer House, I think it.
Yeah.
Yes, where it had all those big action stars in it. Which, and I think that was I think we had touched a bit on Ray and Wynorski in that episode, because we were talking about how these schlock or tours are doing these these Christmas movies or these family movies now, and it's such an interesting thing to see.
Yeah, it's funny too because that's kind of where the market is. I mean, Hallmark is playing Christmas movies in August.
Yeah.
They start earlier every year, so they just need product. And guys like, you know, Wynorski, Ray, and Dakota, they churn out product. What they do.
Yeah, yeah. I know if my wife and I usually like to watch the Kitten Bowl during on Super Bowl Sunday, and the Hallmark Channel used to show that, and they did away with it, and they're playing their movies instead. And I don't think they were Christmas movies necessarily, but it's still these schlock, romance films that they just pump out really quickly. And so, yeah, if they're starting to replace all of their regular programming with more and more of these movies, yeah, they need Wynorski and Ray and Dakota and their ilk to be able to pump them out for them.
Yeah, I mean it's comforting. It's comforting that the guys that got their starts in the Ray got started a little earlier in the late 70s, but yeah, the guys that have been with us since the 80s that are still churning them out, and they still have their fingerprints on everything they do. A lot of directors, they get lost in just kind of this anonymous, or get stuck doing television work that started off with a promising film career, wound up working in television, and there's nothing wrong with that. They're getting work, but the Wynorski and Ray, for them to still be making movies that I'm sure they still want to make, that's great.
Yeah, no, I agree for sure. And I think these two that we talked about today are on Tubi, and I think they're a great place to start. I think with the comic book genre being so big, I think Wynorski's introduction to it, or I'm sorry, his part in the comic book genre, it can't be missed. I think it's one that people really should check out. And then I think people come to this blog, or come to Direct to Video Connoisseur for action films, and Operation Cobra, aka Inferno, is it, especially for Don the Dragon Wilson, it's probably about as good as it gets. I think, like you said, if you were going to rank, if this was a Blood Fist movie, it would be in the top 3.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we chose two really fun uh, movies that are very different in style and theme, but in content, but are at the end of the day very typical of their directors. I think we did good with choosing our films.
Yeah, for sure. Well, we'll leave it here. But thank you again, Mitch, for coming on. This was another great conversation, and thank you to everybody else for listening. And we'll be back soon with the Direct to Video Connoisseur. Bye, everyone.